Hey, thanks for clicking on a compilation. I just learned that a lot of people watch these to help them fall asleep. So I'm going to choose to take that as a compliment. But I am working on a sleepy time compilation specifically made for those of you who can't seem to stay awake.
Ugh, I could barely stay awake for some of these.
Yeah, well, that's not entirely my fault.
What's with the new setup? We doing the show from here now? Cause my contract specifically said...
Relax, we're not doing the show from in here. I haven't done the after files in a long time, and some people thought that I'm just not streaming anymore. But the truth is we're doing construction in the studio, and my streaming station is dismantled.
Yeah, likely story.
So last compilation was all about stories that happened below ground. Today we're gonna do stories that happen above ground, like way above ground. We're talking mountains, pyramids.
Are we gonna talk about Mount Hayes?
We are.
Mount motherfucking Hayes.
Watch your mouth. First up is episode 58, which is about Mount Shasta. And a lot of weird things happen on Mount Shasta. But my favorite story is probably the one involving the robot grandma who, well, I don't want to spoil it.
There's poop involved.
There is. It's a short episode. I'll see you when you get back.
115+00.
If you follow this channel, you know that many of these videos come from your suggestions. And I get emails all the time from people who want content about UFOs. Others want lost cities, strange disappearances, or
Lizard people!
reptilian humanoids. Today, we fulfill all these requests in one video. There is no other place on Earth steeped in more mystery than Mount Shasta. Aliens, ghosts, underground bases, interdimensional portals. Mount Shasta has it all. Let's find out why. As you approach Mount Shasta, the first thing you notice is how absolutely out of place it is. Though it's one of the tallest peaks in North America, it's not directly connected to any other mountains. It stands alone and seems to leap off the landscape. At over 14,000 feet above sea level, Mount Shasta is so tall and steep that it pierces the clouds and creates its own weather. Located in Northern California, Mount Shasta is actually a semi-active volcano. Its last major eruption was in 1250, but as recently as last year, Mount Shasta was oozing lava that caused several fires in the surrounding forest. And just about every type of paranormal event you can think of converges at Mount Shasta. UFO sightings, mysterious disappearances, lost cities, ghosts, gods, everything. Mount Shasta legends exist in every culture that's lived in its shadow, including the first cultures. Native tribes have inhabited the area for over 10,000 years, making it one of the longest occupied areas in North America. And each tribe has a myth about the mountain. Some tribes say Mount Shasta is the sacred center of the universe. Others say the mountain is the birthplace of all life. And as different as these stories are, there is one theme found in every native legend: you do not go above the tree line. That area is reserved for the sky people. Not far from Mount Shasta is Petroglyph Point, which has some of the oldest stone writing ever found in North America, dating back thousands of years. And the glyphs depict the types of things you'd expect to see: animals, rivers, the sun, stars. But there are also carvings of what some people believe are sky people. Native tribes believed that the sky people were spiritual beings who existed in a different realm, a plane of existence where souls and spirits of the dead dwell. But what if the sky people aren't spirits of the dead, but are actually beings that are very much alive, just not human? There are Native American legends that describe a race of giants that live on Mount Shasta. The Modoc have the Matagagmi, which are said to be the keepers of the woods. Could these ancient people be describing Bigfoot? Matagagmi is the Modoc word for Bigfoot, and it's similar to the Tibetan word Metogangmi, which is their word for Yeti.
Hey, how do ancient Indians in Tibet end up with the same word for Bigfoot?
Well,
There would have to be some kind of land bridge between India and America. Wait a minute.
you're getting way ahead of me on this one, pal.
Are we gonna talk about...
We are.
Oh, baby!
Since at least the 1920s, people have claimed to see tall creatures roaming the forests around Mount Shasta. In 1976, a camper thought a park ranger was investigating his camp, but upon closer inspection, it was a Bigfoot. Another famous account happened in 1962 when a hiker claimed to have seen a female Bigfoot giving birth.
Ooh, that sounds messy.
It does.
A lot of hot water and towels.
Right. I get it.
Because if a Bigfoot is giving birth, oh boy, that's gonna be a
I said I get it. In 1930, a humanoid skeleton that was over 8 feet tall was discovered near Mount Shasta, and this wasn't a fringe report. It was covered by major newspapers all over the area. And native legends say the race of giants prospered on the earth for thousands of years, but were suddenly wiped out in a great flood.
It always ends with a great flood, doesn't it?
Every time. But there is an interpretation of this legend that claims the giants of the woods are not Bigfoot. They're a race of people called Lemurians, and that brings us to the fascinating story of J.C. Brown. He's considered the first person to find the lost civilization of Lemuria, but his story takes a mysterious turn. In 1904, J.C. Brown was working as a geologist for a gold mining operation, and he was sent to Mount Shasta to look for gold. During one of Brown's expeditions, he came across a rock fall that looked like something could be buried underneath. And when he cleared the rubble, he discovered the entrance to a cave that disappeared into the darkness for what looked like forever. Brown hiked the length of the tunnel, which turned out to be 11 miles long. And that may sound crazy, but Mount Shasta is a volcano, and the entire area around the mountain is a network of lava tubes. And lava tubes can be huge and stretch miles underground. And when J.C. Brown reached the end of the tunnel, he found what he described as the remains of an ancient city. He found machinery long abandoned that looked like it was used in a mining operation. He found statues, tablets, shields, and weapons, all made of gold, and all inscribed with hieroglyphics. He found what he called a worship room with statues that seemed to glow in the dark. And the final chamber of the cave system was a tomb where 27 giant skeletons were arranged. And they ranged in height from 7 feet to over 10 feet tall. Unsure of what to do, J.C. Brown covered the entrance to the cave and told no one about it. But over the next few years, Brown became obsessed with a book by James Churchward called The Lost Continent of Mu, and by stories of Lemuria, which he thought could be the same thing. Lemuria, according to the legend, was an entire continent that sunk beneath the ocean many thousands of years ago.
It sounds like Atlantis.
Well, it's funny you should say that. Turns out Lemuria and Atlantis are connected. In 1899, Frederick Spencer Oliver published a book called A Dweller on Two Planets, which tells an amazing story that was found written on ancient Hindu tablets. Over 1 million years ago, the Earth was ruled by two very advanced civilizations, the Atlanteans and the Lemurians, and both cultures had technology that far exceeds our own. Atlantis was the dominant culture, and for many years it was benevolent. But about 25,000 years ago, Atlantis became corrupt and wanted to rule all people on the Earth. Lemurians rejected this idea and wanted to be left alone. And after much internal conflict, Atlantis decided to go to war with the Lemurians. And for years, the two mighty civilizations deployed devastating nuclear weapons against each other. The explosions were so violent that they caused the Earth's tectonic plates to become unstable and the magnetic poles to shift. Finally, a massive flood tore across the planet and laid waste to both civilizations. In all, 60 million Lemurians died. Atlantis suffered severe losses as well. The few surviving Atlanteans evacuated to Agartha, an underground city that we'll be covering on this channel. The last remaining Lemurians fled to Mount Shasta and established a city called Telos. And what's amazing is, there's a Hawaiian legend that says the islands of Hawaii were once part of a vast continent called Mu, also known as Lemuria. And once J.C. Brown learned of these stories, he was convinced that he had found the lost civilization of Lemuria under Mount Shasta. So he decided, now 30 years later, it was time to go back to the mountain. And when J.C. Brown returned to Mount Shasta, he put together a search party to help him rediscover Lemuria. Brown had assembled a group of 80 researchers, scientists, and explorers. And after 1,000 years of legend, Lemuria was about to be proven real. Newspapers widely covered the story, and the excitement around the adventure was palpable. Then, on the morning that the expedition was set to begin, J.C. Brown didn't show. People combed every tavern, every street, every inn looking for him, but they would find no trace. J.C. Brown had vanished and was never heard from again. Explanations for J.C. Brown's disappearance covered everything. Some said he was simply a fraud, though he never took a penny from anyone. Others said a secret but powerful organization learned of Brown's plans and had him erased.
Illuminati?
Yep. But a few others were convinced that J.C. Brown no longer needed a search party to find Lemuria, that he had been granted access and taken there by some mysterious machine. And to hear descriptions of this machine, it sounds like a vehicle or a...
UFO!
Right. And there have been UFO sightings around Mount Shasta going back over 100 years. And in recent years, sightings are accelerating. Of the top 300 UFO hotspots in the world, Mount Shasta is ranked 13th. People have seen chrome objects hovering above dark mountain roads. Others report lights moving in formation, silently swarming the peak, and then disappear. One of the most widely reported UFO sightings happened in 2008. Residents said they saw what looked like a giant glowing jellyfish hovering over the mountain. Eyewitnesses said it made no noise, but it seemed to have a fire raging inside of it. Now, unfortunately, there are no photos from this sighting, but just last year, someone captured this footage.
This happened. I'm sorry.
What is that?
There's a passenger on the plane, looks out the window, grabs the phone. This was filmed in June. The traveler sees that, an object apparently changing shapes in seconds.
What?
And what makes Mount Shasta UFOs really strange is that they don't just hover around the mountain. People have seen them fly into the mountain. And they don't mean they flew into an opening in the mountain. Every single person said the UFOs flew into the side of the mountain and just vanished into the rock. And it's been said that Mount Shasta is hiding an energy vortex that allows passage into another dimension. Locals believe the UFOs hide in the clouds and enter the mountain through some kind of portal. But that begs the question, a portal to where? For decades, eyewitnesses have seen strange beings in Mount Shasta's caves that seem to have the ability to walk through walls. They just vanish. And it's not just these strange beings that disappear on Mount Shasta. It's one of the most active hotspots in North America for mysterious disappearances. In 2011, a young couple was camping on Mount Shasta with their 3-year-old son. Suddenly, the boy's parents looked up and their son was gone. They immediately called the authorities and a massive search went on for 5 hours. Then, a sheriff's deputy heard a quiet voice coming from a bush not far from the campsite. This was odd because dozens of trained search and rescue professionals had combed every inch of this area multiple times and found nothing. But the boy was found unharmed, so this was called a successful operation, and that was pretty much the end of it. It wasn't until a few weeks later when the story would take a mysterious turn. The boy was talking to his grandmother, who he called Grandma Cappy, about the incident. He said he liked this Grandma Cappy better than the other Grandma Cappy who found him in the woods.
Whoa, what?
Yeah, the boy's mother was upset by this. What other Grandma Cappy? The boy said the other Grandma Cappy had taken him to a cave in the woods, and there were other people there too who were just frozen in place. And this new grandma seemed nice enough, but then she wanted to examine the boy, and for some reason she asked him to defecate on a piece of paper.
Did he?
No, he said he couldn't go.
Yeah, I'm a shy pooper too.
But it gets even stranger. Grandma Cappy said that just a few weeks earlier, she was camping in the same area when she blacked out. Then she woke up face down in the dirt and noticed she had a strange puncture wound on the back of her neck. She said she was violently ill and thought it was some kind of spider bite. She was camping with a friend who also had a similar wound and was also terribly sick.
DNA extraction.
Well, that's one theory, and Grandma Cappy said she's never going to that mountain again. Then there's the story of Carl Landers. In 1999, Landers, along with 2 friends, set out to hike to the summit of Mount Shasta. And along the trail, Landers just vanished. He didn't wander off, he didn't cry for help, he was just gone. And it's not like he disappeared into the woods or fell down a hole. There was good visibility for over 100 yards. Landers vanished in a wide open field. And he was an experienced hiker who knew this terrain extremely well. Yet somehow he disappeared off the mountain without a trace. And for a week, a huge manhunt searched every inch of the area. The National Guard even sent helicopters equipped with infrared sensors. Nothing was found. No equipment, no clothing, no body. All gone. To this day, there is no explanation for what happened. So what's going on at Mount Shasta? Can we use logic and science to explain these mysteries? Well, it's difficult to explain ancient native legends because we have no evidence to support or refute the stories. Since the legends have been passed down over several thousand years, not only is it possible, but it's likely that these stories evolved over time. I mean, who can resist adding a little drama to make a story seem more mystical? I'm guilty of doing it on this channel. Mount Shasta isn't a very active volcano now, but it's erupted many times in the past, and human settlements were present during those eruptions. When native tribes describe Mount Shasta as the home of a god who throws flaming rocks at his enemies, we could certainly see that these ancients were trying to make sense of what they saw. And when American Indians spoke of giants, did they really mean Bigfoot? It's not clear. There isn't much reporting of Bigfoot until 1924, when a few gold prospectors came back from an expedition talking about how they were attacked by giant ape men who threw boulders at their camp. And the story caught fire and grabbed so much attention that park rangers launched a full investigation. What they found didn't impress them. They said the boulders were actually just large rocks and looked like they were placed there by the men, and there were supposedly Bigfoot tracks in the area. But when the rangers looked closely at the tracks, it was clear they were made by one of the miners using his knuckles and the palm of his hand. Still, there's no stopping a viral story, and the legend of Bigfoot was born. But what about these portals that seem to swallow people whole? Is there any science to support the phenomenon that 2 points in space can be joined by nothing but energy? Turns out, there is. In 2013, NASA discovered a phenomenon called an X-point. X-points are places where the magnetic field of the Earth is directly connected to the magnetic field of the Sun. This is an uninterrupted path of energetic particles leading from our planet all the way to our star, 93 million miles away. Another study confirmed these portals and found some of them are short-lived, opening and closing very quickly, but others are stable for long periods of time. Now, obviously, we can't use these portals to travel. Yet. But there is science to support that the Earth is magnetically tethered to the Sun, and the magnetism around Mount Shasta is highly unusual. The entire area is blanketed by an enormous negative magnetic anomaly. Could this area of strong magnetism be creating ruptures in space that cause people to disappear? Well, that's a stretch, but if some kind of electromagnetic event were to occur, there are few places on Earth better suited than Mount Shasta. Now, the story of the missing boy who suddenly reappeared 5 hours later, that's true. The part about his grandma Cappy and the puncture in her neck, that came from someone claiming to be her posting her story on the internet, so I don't know. And the boy's parents conveniently want to remain anonymous. But Carl Landers really did disappear without a trace, as have many people on Mount Shasta. Now, most of the time, missing hikers are discovered not far from their last known position, usually dead from injuries from a fall. But it's worth acknowledging that there are plenty, I mean lots, of people who just vanish with no explanation.
Well, what about the UFOs?
Well, the UFO sightings can't really be explained.
Aha!
Weather around Mount Shasta is highly unusual and creates what's known as lenticular cloud formations. And lenticular clouds look like giant UFOs, but they're just clouds. As for what looks like flying spacecraft hovering around and disappearing into the mountains, we'd be silly to discount those reports. Even our own government is finally admitting there are objects zipping around the planet that just can't be explained. So what about J.C. Brown and Lemuria? Well, the J.C. Brown story is a great one, but it might be debunked. In 2017, a researcher named Stephen Sindoni tracked down a man named John Benjamin Bodie, a mining engineer who retired in Mount Shasta. And Bodie had worked for the Lord Cowderay Mining Company, which was also J.C. Brown's employer. And Bodie lived right across the street from where J.C. Brown had given daily lectures on Lemuria and the lost city of Telos. This may not be definitive proof that J.C. Brown was a hoax, but it's pretty compelling research. And I should note that Sindoni is not a debunker. He's a hollow earth researcher who's been on countless TV and radio shows discussing how the earth is hollow and home to alien civilizations that live right under our feet. And speaking of hollow earth, what about Lemuria? Is it hiding inside Mount Shasta? I think Lemuria is the best legend about Mount Shasta, and I'm not the only one. Entire religions have been built around the Lemuria story. In the 1930s, Guy Ballard, a mining engineer, was exploring Mount Shasta. He said he was met by a young man named the Count of Saint Germain. And Count Saint Germain is a legend in paranormal history. He's supposedly immortal and shows up during all kinds of historical events. There's even an account of him being present at the signing of the Declaration of Independence, where he actually gave a speech. And we're going to do a whole video on Saint Germain. He deserves more attention. But anyway, Ballard and his wife Edna claim to be the sole messengers of Saint Germain and other ascended masters, as they're called. And the Ballards began giving public lectures on Saint Germain's teachings and eventually had grown the I Am activity movement to over 1 million followers.
Not easy to do without social media.
Oh, it's not. And after Ballard passed away in 1971, most of the I Am members left the religion, but it's still around. You can visit the I Am reading room right now in Mount Shasta City. And Lemuria and Atlantis were nothing more than stories for hundreds, even thousands of years. But with the discoveries like Bimini Road in the Bahamas, and the Yanaguni monument off the coast of Japan, we have to start wondering if these myths weren't myths at all, but actual places. Now, skeptics will say Bimini and Yanaguni are natural formations, but I'll put the pictures up for you to decide. To me, Bimini Road is iffy. I lean toward man-made, but I can see the other side of the argument. But Yanaguni? That looks 100% man-made to me, so what if? Mount Shasta has captured the imagination of people around the world for centuries, and those who visit often say the mountain called to them. And I think it's fair to say that if you're the type of person who goes to a place expecting to have a spiritual or supernatural experience, there's a good chance you'll have one. The mind is a powerful thing. But as long as you're not starting religions based on this, I don't think there's anything wrong with believing what others say is a crazy theory. Our civilization's greatest leaps forward come from heretics who dare to challenge the status quo. From mavericks and dissenters have come scientific discoveries that altered the course of history and forced even the most ardent skeptics to wonder, what if? What if there was an ancient civilization that sunk beneath the ocean? And what if the children of those people are here now, just waiting for our own civilization to catch up, waiting for us to emerge from our selfish adolescence so we can join a larger community, one that exists only for scientific discovery, artistic expression, and spiritual enlightenment. Now, I admit it sounds like fantasy, but when we stop asking, what if? Civilization dies. But as long as there are heretics and mavericks and dissenters, we have a chance. And if you're one of those, keep asking, what if? Everyone on Earth, whether they know it or not, is counting on you. So there are a few new stories since I released that episode about Mount Shasta. So if you want me to do a part 2, just let me know in the comments.
Hello. We're not going to address the elephant in the room.
What elephant in the room?
You.
Yes, I recorded that episode during COVID when I gained a few pounds, but I wasn't going to mention it.
Yeah, how can you not? You look like the kid from Mask.
I did not look that bad.
Sloth. Love. Chunk. Baby. Ruth.
Quiet. Okay, next. 142. Oh, this is about the CIA's Project 8200.
Mount Hayes.
Yep. This one is about a CIA remote viewer who saw underground bases beneath Mount Hayes.
Mount motherfucking Hayes.
Okay, enough with that.
Oh, hey. You know you can buy Mount motherfucking Hayes coffee mugs in the White House store.
Please, no plugs during compilations.
3+15+00.
During the 1960s and 70s, the United States and the Soviet Union fought the Cold War on many fronts. Some of these engagements were obvious, like the Cuban Missile Crisis and the proxy wars in Asia. Other conflicts were not so obvious. In the 1970s, America and Russia engaged in a new type of warfare, psychic warfare. The CIA was actively recruiting and training people with a natural talent for remote viewing. Remote viewing is projecting your consciousness to anywhere on Earth and beyond. One remote viewer, entirely by accident, found himself at Mount Hayes in Alaska. Mount Hayes is in the middle of nowhere. There's no civilization for miles, but something was calling him to the mountain. Then he looked inside the mountain. There was a base hidden inside Mount Hayes. Then he saw this was not a base built by humans. When multiple sources confirmed the existence of the base, they soon realized this was only the beginning. The story of the psychic competition between the US and the Soviet Union is like the chicken and the egg. Some say the CIA heard the Soviets had psychic spies, so they launched their own programs in response. Others say the US was first and the Soviets were responding. Either way, both superpowers created well-funded, super-secret programs focused on ESP, or extrasensory perception. In other words, psychic espionage. A skilled remote viewer would be the perfect spy. They could go anywhere, see anything, completely undetected. Remote viewing means the end of state secrets. Really, the end of all secrets. But remote viewing didn't start out as a military intelligence project. It began as a research project. In 1972, two scientists, Hal Puthoff and Russell Targ, launched an ESP program at the Stanford Research Institute, or SRI. Then they started looking for volunteers and came across Ingo Swann.
Oh, Hey, what do you call a fat psychic?
Please don't.
A fortune teller.
Ingo Swann claimed to be a great psychic. Puthoff was skeptical, so he set up a test. The team had access to a large magnetometer, which can detect slight variations in magnetic fields. Swann had no idea what the machine was. Even though it was buried under 30 feet of concrete, he could see into the device and describe it. He was able to sketch the magnetometer readings. Then he was able to affect the readings. This was good and bad. Good that Ingo proved his abilities, but the purpose of the magnetometer was to detect Soviet nuclear tests. Affecting the output set off alarms all over the lab. The experiment almost got them kicked out of Stanford. But the experiment caught the attention of the CIA. They didn't care that Ingo could move the needle, but the fact that he could see through superconducting shielding buried in 30 feet of concrete, well, that was a problem, but also an opportunity. The CIA quietly funded SRI's research and had them focus specifically on remote viewing, and Ingo Swann became known as the father of this technique. Initial experiments were mostly successful. Ingo could identify images in sealed envelopes. He could project his consciousness to different places and see hidden objects. But this didn't help the CIA. They needed him to view specific locations, Soviet locations. So Ingo Swann and the SRI team created the Scan8 protocol. Project Scan8 was remote viewing by coordinates. Here's how it works. You give a remote viewer longitude and latitude coordinates, and you tell them nothing else. Ingo Swann could see what was at a given set of coordinates with remarkable accuracy. By the way, Ingo Swann also remote viewed the moon. I did an entire episode on it. It's linked down below. Now, I don't want to spoil it, but what he saw on the moon was pretty amazing.
And for the record, he's the only person who went to the moon.
Not now. Soon, another psychic joined the project, Pat Price. Pat was a retired police commissioner. He was a good counterpart to Ingo Swann. Ingo was a painter. He was the typical free spirit artist. He was loud and confident and funny. Pat Price, on the other hand, was grounded and serious. Pat solved a few crimes using his psychic abilities. Now, at the time, Pat thought it was nothing more than intuition, hunches that usually turned out to be true. After he retired from the police department and had more time to focus, he realized his talent was more than intuition. Today, Pat Price is considered one of the most gifted psychics ever. The CIA wanted to test them. Both Pat and Ingo were given coordinates to view. Nobody knew what was at the site except the one CIA analyst who gave them the numbers. Even though they remote viewed separately, both Ingo and Pat sketched similar results. They saw the layout of some kind of compound. They said it looked high-tech. They described a large radar dish, a guardhouse. They saw roll-up doors and jeeps. They said it looked like a military installation. Pat Price was even able to read documents on the site. Now, this is unheard of. Nobody else can do this. But Pat saw a cabinet labeled Operation Pool. Inside were green folders named Cue Ball, 14 Ball, 8 Ball, and Rack Up. The team showed the results to the analyst and asked how close they were. The analyst said, "Sorry, but these sketches are nonsense. I gave you the coordinates to my cabin in West Virginia." The whole team at SRI was disappointed and confused. How could both men be so wrong, yet see similar things? So they sent someone to the coordinates. He found the cabin, but a few hundred feet down the road from the cabin, he found something else. Ingo Swann and Pat Price were given the coordinates of a CIA analyst's vacation home in Sugar Grove, West Virginia. But when they remote viewed the location, that's not what they saw. They saw a military installation. The CIA analyst who gave the coordinates didn't realize that an NSA listening post was just over the ridge from his cabin. Pat and Ingo both assumed this was the target. This was the type of location they were usually asked to view. The Sugar Grove facility in West Virginia was one of the most secret NSA installations in the country. It captured information from Soviet satellites as they flew over. It served as a listening post for all kinds of transmissions. In fact, Sugar Grove is in the NRQZ, the National Radio Quiet Zone. The NRQZ covers about 13,000 square miles in Virginia, West Virginia, and Maryland. No radio signals of any kind are permitted there. If you fire up a radio, you will get a visit, a fine, and possibly jail time. A part of the zone is so locked down that microwave ovens and Wi-Fi are not permitted.
I didn't know microwaves. Then how can you enjoy a fresh, delicious meal from Factor? Go to Factor, use promo.
Please don't plug them now.
What? They didn't pay for a mid-roll?
No.
Okay, never mind.
So, Pat Price and Ingo Swan got it right. They described this facility in detail from Northern California, 3,000 miles away. And you'd think this would be cause for celebration. It wasn't. Every federal law enforcement agency in the country showed up at SRI. They wanted to know why some wacky CIA psychic contractors were spying on an NSA facility. And by the way, Project Q-Ball, Project 8-Ball, and Rack Up, these were so highly classified that even the project names were top secret. The NSA was furious. Once all the agencies calmed down, SRI went back to work. This time, the CIA would focus on the enemy.
Who, the American people?
The Soviets.
Ah.
Pat Price was given coordinates to view. He said he saw a science fiction fantasy crane. Nobody knew what he was talking about. Pat grabbed a ruler, pen, and paper and drew a gantry crane. This type of crane is used to move shipping containers and lift ships out of the water. They're big. Pat said this was the most giant crane he'd ever seen. He saw someone walk by, and the wheels on the crane were 10 feet high, and the wheels were on train tracks. The CIA had a sketch based on aerial photographs of the site. There was a giant gantry crane. Inside the facility, Pat saw enormous steel spheres 60 feet across. There were no photographs of this. Nobody thought much of it. Pat said that whatever they were building, the Soviets couldn't get it to work. But 5 years later, US intelligence would discover that the spheres were there. They were nuclear containment devices, and they never worked correctly. Pat Price was right again. At this point, CIA plucked Pat out of SRI. They wanted him to work for them directly. Pat was given more coordinates for a site in Russia. He tried to go there, but something was pulling his focus from his target. Something in Alaska. It was a mountain, Mount Hayes. Now, this was unexpected. Mount Hayes is desolate and remote. There are no roads and no civilization for miles. It's in the middle of a frozen wasteland. Pat said he didn't see anything.
Oh, he lied?
Yes. But later, on his own, he projected back to the mountain. Then Pat projected into the mountain. Then he understood why he was drawn there. Inside Mount Hayes was a huge base. He saw advanced technology and equipment. He saw computers and consoles and machines that he didn't understand. Then he saw the operators of the machines. Pat saw beings that looked almost human, but were thin with large heads. And they were busy at work on something, though Pat Price didn't know what. Then Pat got scared. Inside the mountain, in the base, working alongside aliens, were humans. Specifically, US military personnel. 2 days later, Pat was in Las Vegas. As he walked through his hotel lobby, someone bumped into him. Then Pat felt a sharp pain in his leg. The next day, Pat had severe stomach cramps. And later that evening, he was found dead in his hotel room. His body was quickly removed. No autopsy was performed. No crime scene was designated. The official cause of death was a heart attack. He was 56 years old.
How do they know the cause of death without an autopsy?
Good question, and we'll never know. Pat's body was cremated, and then they called his wife.
Oh no.
His remains are now in an unmarked grave in North Hollywood, we think.
And I'm going to see what this is. This is marker 700. So indeed, Pat's grave is entirely unmarked. All right, I think he deserves better than that.
Pat was with the CIA for less than 4 months. A few years later, the CIA's remote viewing program was called Project Grill Flame. Same mission, different name. Eventually, it would be called Project Stargate. In 1980, the operations and training officer for the project was Skip Atwater. Skip was a retired Army intelligence officer now recruiting and training remote viewers. One day, Hal Putoff shows up at Skip's door with 4 files from Pat Price's remote viewing sessions, each with a different location. Pat gave the documents to Hal before going to work for the CIA full-time. Hal told Skip, "You might want to look at these." Skip looked at the files and couldn't believe it. One location was a secret alien base under Mount Hayes, Alaska. And the 3 other locations? 3 other mountains, and 3 more alien bases. You've heard of the Bermuda Triangle. If you followed this channel for a while, you know about the Nevada Triangle. These are places where planes, ships, and people vanish without a trace. There are mysterious triangles all over the world. There's the Dragon Triangle in Japan, the Formosa Triangle in Taiwan, and quite a few others. There's also the Alaska Triangle. The points are Juneau in the east, Anchorage in the west, then up to Barrow in the north. Since 1988, 16,000 people have gone missing in the Alaska Triangle. Nationwide, each state has an average of about 7 people per 100,000 reported missing every year. Massachusetts has the lowest number, about 2 people per 100,000. Hawaii has the second most, 16 people. Not only does Alaska report the most missing people per year, but their number is more than 10 times higher than Hawaii, over 173 people missing per 100,000. And most of those go missing in the Alaska Triangle. The area is harsh and desolate. I'm sure many of the missing people simply succumb to the elements, but not all the people. There are native legends that go back thousands of years that describe creatures appearing and disappearing in thin air, sometimes taking victims with them. There's also something very strange about the geology in Alaska. It's covered with negative magnetic anomalies. This is where magnetism operates in reverse. This would be a nightmare for airplanes, GPS, or any guidance system. And the epicenter of the Alaska Triangle? The place where magnetism goes crazy?
Mount Hayes.
Mount Hayes.
Mount Hayes.
Okay. Mount Hayes is also a UFO hotspot.
Spotted and tracked for about 24 hours, moving northeasterly at 40,000 feet. At that altitude, officials say they did fear this unknown object posed a risk to civilian flights.
There have been sightings of craft that go back years, and sightings as recently as a few weeks ago. People have seen objects hovering over the mountain and then flying in formation at impossible speeds. There are reports of objects vanishing into the side of the mountain, not through a door, through solid rock. There's a theory that the magnetic disturbances around Mount Hayes are portals that allow spacecraft to go in and out of the mountain. Mount Hayes was one of 4 mountains that Pat Price said contained a secret alien base. The others are Mount Perdido in Spain, Mount Inyangani in Zimbabwe, and Mount Zeal in Australia. Pat gave this information to Hal Puthoff. Puthoff then passed it along to Skip Atwater. Now this time, Skip worked with another extremely talented remote viewer, Joseph McMoneagle. I've talked about him in a few different episodes. He's a legend in the remote viewing community. He's conducted thousands of remote viewing sessions for the Army, CIA. He's also helped companies find oil and precious metals. He's helped law enforcement find missing people. If anyone could confirm Pat Price's findings, it was Joseph McMoneagle. So Skip gave Joe 4 sets of coordinates, and that's all. No other information, just the numbers. Not only did Joe see the alien bases, he saw so much more. It was July 28, 1982. Project 8200 begins. Skip Atwater dimmed the lights in the interview room and took a seat. Joe McMoneagle sat on the other side of the table, pen and paper ready. Joe had no idea what he'd be viewing. That's the ideal protocol. If a remote viewer is given information about a location in advance, it could ruin the entire process. Even small details can distract a remote viewer. Details create expectations, which can lead to false positives. For example, you can't say, remote view this bowling alley. The remote viewer will start seeing balls rolling and pins falling.
Beer drinking.
Right.
I'm throwing rocks tonight.
I got it. Are they really seeing these things, or is this just what they'd expect to see at any bowling alley? The only way to be sure a remote viewer sees the correct location is by giving them nothing. Skip had a map in a sealed envelope. He then read a series of numbers, coordinates. 63 degrees, 39 minutes north, 146 degrees, 45 minutes west. Joe didn't know what this was, but Skip knew it was
Mount Hayes. What?
So Joe relaxed, closed his eyes, and projected his consciousness to those coordinates. As images came into his mind, he sketched them on paper.
I have a bunch of water, land, ice, and all these general things written in here. This is generally a very desolate area. And I drew in the mountain range. I wrote mountains. This is a whole range of mountains that extends for thousands of miles. So that'll give you an idea of the scale at which I'm drawing here. And I sort of put an X where I perceive the target to be. Going to the target. And I believe that the target's placed deep in this mountain range in this desolate area.
Water, land, ice, mountains, a desolate area. Joe was describing Mount Hayes. He drew a pretty accurate map of the area. It was time for Joe to go inside the mountain.
Here's the target, which is perceptible.
See tubes, like pipes, masses of electronics, grid work of some kind.
This is the target, which is perceptible.
It's an emitter of some kind. A sense of great power. Uses a great deal of power, energy. Very low frequency feeling.
This is the target, which is describable.
Huge ground grid forming a electronic arena, being very large power input lines from a miniaturized nuclear power plant or power unit. Other tubes buried in the ground, they're coils. Tubes are coils.
Joe said the things he was seeing were so foreign to him that he had trouble putting them into words. He said, imagine an Aborigine trying to describe the interior of a car. They don't really have any context. They don't have words for screws and bolts and glass and metal. That's how Joe felt. The technology was far beyond what he could comprehend. But Joe saw that the base was under a large dome. On top of the dome was an emitter sending a huge amount of energy into space. Next, Joe was told the coordinates of Mount Seal in Australia.
The yawning entrance to a underground cave. Black doorway. Like a smooth dome of concrete. A black hole. The storage site of some kind. I see just a collage of things buried. Just coils. Keep seeing boxes of electronics.
Under Mount Seal, Joe sees another facility with advanced technology. Then he sees something familiar.
Keep envisioning control centers. Keep getting visions of all the command and control centers that I've ever been in.
Joe describes an underground command center. Later, other remote viewers would describe consoles and screens, and what sounds a lot like NORAD.
Reference to caretaker personnel. Do you have visuals of them, or?
No, I just perceive like a watchdog force or something there.
What kind of emotional impact was this on them?
Oh, I have a very sinister feeling for this target.
Next, Joe goes to Mount Perdido in the Pyrenees Mountains between France and Spain. The first thing he says is, I see sheep.
Gray rocks. Three sheep. A natural cave. Cliff and rocks.
Mount Perdido does have cliffs, gray rocks, and yes, there are sheep everywhere. Joe sketches the layout of the facility.
This connection is observable.
Interconnecting points like a spider web. Impression of relay. Impression that it catches something and relays it back.
Stream high frequency relay. Transponder.
This is where we start to learn that the facilities are connected like a spider web.
They'll get this impression of a string of beads in the sky circling the Earth.
Toward the end of the session, Joe could see the facility being built. He said the construction took place about 2 to 2.5 years ago.
Oh, he saw aliens at the base?
Nope.
Oh.
It was being built by people. When Joe McMonagle was remote viewing the site at Mount Perdido, Spain, he was extremely accurate. He saw the cliffs, gray rocks, and sheep. That's the only time he mentioned sheep in thousands of remote viewing sessions, but he was right about them too. When Skip Atwater conducted the interview, Joe saw something unexpected, the facility being built. Skip was expecting this to be construction that happened hundreds or thousands of years ago, with advanced technology maybe using UFOs. But that's not what Joe saw.
Occupants are describable. Helicopters. Very rugged mountain range. Kind of desolate. Vehicles of transport are perceptible. Helicopters. Not large, but small. Boxes being brought in by helicopters.
Boxes being brought in by helicopters, so human involvement, military involvement. This tracks with what Pat Price saw at the Mount Hayes facility. He saw human military personnel working alongside alien beings. And just like Mount Hayes, Joe saw an emitter sending energy into space.
Impression which I have labeled receive. I feel like this is situated in a footprint. In other words, it's being targeted with some kind of an emitter, and that's a receiver. I have a cable going down into a cleft in the rocks on this particular location, and in the cleft in the rocks is like a control black box and a power pack. Located in the center is a small dish or disc type shape with a spike in it, and that's a very high frequency emitter, and it emits straight up. And there's a necessity that this be located on an extremely tall mountaintop or desert high range of mountains.
During this session, Joe also gets the sense that this location is also involved in transmitting and receiving energy and information. The last mountain viewed is Mount Inyagani in Zimbabwe. Joe sees a singular mountain, a group of high hills. There's a jungle close by. He sees black boxes of electronics. Again, he feels the concept of command, control, and communications. But everything comes together now. These command centers are linked. Joe says it's like a spider web.
It's not turned on, or it's turned on, but it's lying dormant. They're all lying dormant, but they're all turned on that are installed. They're still going in. I get that impression. This is just a gut feeling now, but this is a perception, a concept perception.
Mm-hmm.
If you equate this to a cobweb, every single angle in a cobweb represents a location on the cobweb. And I get an impression that the spider has not turned his whole cobweb on yet. But when he does, then it'll just be rattle the web anywhere.
After the session, Joe tried to explain what he meant by spider web or cobweb. Now remember, Joe never mentions aliens, but he wasn't looking for aliens. He wasn't looking for anything, he was just given coordinates. But he sees technology he can't comprehend when he views these locations.
This is all off the wall to me. My raw impressions are each one of these target sites is like a different spoke in a wheel. That's a bad example, but it's like a different part of a jigsaw puzzle, and each one is dormant. It does nothing unless it's commanded to do something,
Mm-hmm.
and then all it does is transfer. It just transfers something. I get just an overwhelming feeling of the big 3C, command, control, and communications.
What are these locations transferring, and to where? Joe sees it.
Sensing and receiving and emitting relay. Locations integral part of location. Get a fixed orbitable platform. It's not going anywhere. No occupants now, but there's a capability. It seems. Can't tell if it's occupiable there or occupied before delivery. It's fully automated. No occupants, fully automated.
Like every remote viewing session, after Joe brings his consciousness back, he tries to explain what he saw and what he wrote down. Skip asks him to describe the space platform.
In trying to go to the origin of the spaceborne platform, I got a very old and a very new sensation, like I got both sensations. It's like periods of time I'm talking about, I'm trying to equate the years, and they're not. There's like, I'm going from ancient to new to ultra modern back to new. I'm flopping around in time, so that's probably pretty important.
What Joe means is that the technology is extremely advanced, but this space platform has been there for a long time. Ancient, he says. Okay, so where's the platform?
This spaceborne platform is in a permanent fixed place. It's not rotating around the Earth, and it's not. It's like it's fastened with a string to the Earth, never moves, and it's way out there. So it has no decaying orbit. It's fixed.
And these bases aren't just within the mountains. They're also under the ocean.
Also, there's more than just these 4 locations. I have an immediate vision of seabed locations. I honestly believe there are seabed locations for these things.
Skip Atwater confirms this and all of these sessions in a talk he gave in 2009.
And that's where he explains again, very old, and that these have been here a long time, but what he is viewing is so new, he doesn't understand it. There are some of these on the seabed. They have to do with precise observation, location and relay, some navigation use.
When Joe first viewed the Mount Hayes alien base, he got a sinister feeling. But as he viewed each location, that feeling became less and less.
My initial target, or target number 1, was I had a very sinister feeling. Target number 2 got less sinister. Target number 3 was not sinister at all. This target has convinced me that this has absolutely no evil content in the way that we would describe evil.
Skip Atwater had another psychic who claimed to be in telepathic communication with these beings in the bases. The psychic asked them, "What do you think of humans?" The response was basically, "Not much."
Uh-oh.
Yeah, that sounded ominous to the psychic too, so he asked the being to explain. The response was, "We see humans like you see a flock of birds. There are a few of us interested in them scientifically, but most of the aliens on Earth, while aware of humans, don't see us as anything more than the other animals here. Yes, we're slightly more intelligent, but otherwise we're just animals in a zoo to them."
Animals with nuclear weapons.
Right, there's that. The only time ETs will involve themselves in our affairs is if we try to do something to harm the planet.
How dare you!
Notice I didn't say harm ourselves. The aliens don't care whether we're here or not, but they won't let us hurt their planet.
Why not?
Well, because the Earth provides them with resources. The 4 alien bases in the mountains, plus the bases in the ocean, are creating energy from something in the Earth. This energy is harnessed, concentrated, and sent to an orbital platform in deep space. What happens from there, nobody knows. Joe McMonagle's remote viewing sessions were focused primarily on technology, energy, and the space platform. Joe did see helicopters outside the base at Mount Perdido, but he didn't see the beings operating the bases. But Pat Price did see them. Pat Price said the bases contain beings that look like humans except for the heart, lungs, blood, and eyes. And if Pat Price says creatures are there, they're there. So Skip Atwater brought in a few other remote viewers, not only to confirm the existence of the bases, but also to see who was operating them. Were they aliens or were they humans? According to several other remote viewers, the answer is yes. When Hal Puthoff gave Pat Price's 4 files to Skip Atwater at Project Stargate, he told him, "You might want to look at these." Pat had seen bases inside mountains, full of advanced technology. Pat saw aliens operating equipment. And in some cases, he saw human military personnel working alongside the aliens. Remote viewer Joe McMoneagle confirmed the existence of the bases and the technology. Joe even determined that the bases are linked and transmit energy to an object in space, but he didn't see the occupants. Years later, Ingo Swann trained a few more remote viewers using CRV, coordinate remote viewing. Skip Atwater decides it's time to go back to the mountains. Remote viewer Bill Ray is given his first set of coordinates. He describes a hollow mountain in a cold climate.
Mount Hayes.
Yes, Mount Hayes. Bill sees electronic monitoring equipment and metallic ships, which are very quick. Bill describes people who were thin, unemotional, cold, and acted like they were programmed. He felt like they had a purpose and a mission. To Bill, they felt unearthly. Remote viewer Paul Smith saw a cluster of structures in a cold, windswept, desolate area. Inside, he saw people manning the site. They seemed regimented and subdued. He also saw box-shaped electronics and cables running underground. Session after session, Skip Atwater's remote viewers saw the same things. Some were more detailed than others, but all saw a mountain in a cold climate. All saw a base inside filled with electronics. And several remote viewers saw thin, unemotional beings going about some kind of business. But Skip was concerned that his own thoughts might be bleeding into the sessions. So he conducted what he called a fully blind session. This is where not only does the remote viewer have nothing but the coordinates, but the same goes for the interviewer. Ed Dames was the monitor who read the coordinates to remote viewer Mel Riley. Mel sees a structure within a mountain. He sees a dark figure seated at a control panel operating a keyboard. Not a keyboard like we use, but something with large buttons or keys like a piano. He sees other figures walking around. As Joe McMoneagle described, Mel says it looked like an underground control center, like NORAD at Cheyenne Mountain. And like Joe, Mel also saw a large dome covering the structures. Then Mel saw what he described as some sort of UFO. Other remote viewers saw UFOs also, but Skip Atwater later admitted that they were afraid to put anything about UFOs in an official report. Now, if we go all the way back to Pat Price in the 1970s, he drew what looks like a UFO under one of the mountains. In Skip's lecture, he sums up all the findings and key takeaways.
The Price data itself describes 4 locations which he claimed and which was presupposed to be UFO bases. How did Pat do this? I don't know how he initially targeted himself. The sites were highly protected from discovery. They were mutually supportive in purpose, and they're very high technology of some kind. And the purposes of these bases included a monitoring function.
Project 8200 confirms the existence of 4 subterranean sites, and several remote viewers saw or felt the presence of extraterrestrials. Project 8200 also confirmed the sites are intentionally hidden and working together. The sites are sometimes occupied, but not always. They're used for observation and relaying information and energy to an object in deep space. Finally, Joe McMoneagle added that other bases are located deep in the ocean. Remember, Joe was remote viewing in the 80s. Skip Atwater gave this lecture in 2009. That's long before the videos we've seen of UFOs flying around and going in and out of the ocean. So after getting confirmation of UFO bases, that's when Skip Atwater decided he'd had enough. His project had limited resources, and if other agencies found out they were spending so much time searching for UFOs, that could be the end of the project, and the end of many people's reputations. But something was nagging Skip. He kept asking himself, is any of this true? Well, he knew the CIA station chief in Northern Australia, so decided to give him a call. He asked his friend in Australia, hey, is anything unusual happening down there? The guy said, nah, this is a dead assignment. Well, except for all the UFOs flying around Mount Seal. Project Stargate was discontinued in 1993. It was finally shut down because, according to the CIA, it didn't provide any useful information.
Oh, come on, are they kidding?
Yeah, that in itself is suspicious. The budgets for Stargate, SRI, and psychic research were tiny compared to other military and intelligence operations. The government spends more money on office supplies than it was giving to Stargate. Really, it was shut down because of negative PR. Remote viewing and the US government's interest in it was showing up in newspapers and magazines and TV shows. ESP was a very fringe idea. I'm sure some senior military official shut it down out of embarrassment. But while Stargate was operational, it kept busy. Joe McMoneagle and Russell Targ both said that every government agency was using their psychics, but nobody would admit it.
I bet it's still going on.
I would think so. It's buried in a black budget somewhere. But how much of all of this is true? Well, a lot of it depends on your perspective and existing beliefs. If you believe in ESP, then this story makes complete sense. If you don't believe, this story sounds bonkers. So let's see if we can find the middle ground. Ingo Swann is the most well-known remote viewer. I've covered him before, and I'm a fan of his. He has some famous successes, like he said that Jupiter had rings. When he said that, it was a ridiculous claim. Later, it was discovered Jupiter does have rings. But he also said Jupiter had a huge mountain range, but on a gas giant, that's not possible.
Hey, did he ever look at Uranus? Yeah.
It's true that Ingo Swann got plenty of things right, but there's no way to know what his true success rate is. Very little can be verified, but he sure tells a hell of a story. Same with Joe McMoneagle. He's a legend. He claims to have a 95% success rate, or 65%, or 75%. It fluctuates. Joe's done remote viewing sessions for live TV and was successful, but his 15 minutes of footage was edited down to 2 minutes of the best stuff. Maybe it was edited for time and he had 15 straight minutes of winners. I don't know. But it all started with Pat Price. But there's not a lot of information out there about him.
Yeah, and the CIA likes it that way.
Yeah, Pat did die under mysterious circumstances, and the story certainly sounds like a CIA hit. But years later, a former KGB agent defected from the Soviet Union, and he claimed to be an assassin. And he said one of his targets was a psychic in Las Vegas who he poisoned.
Oh.
Right. If Pat Price was really able to see inside Soviet military installations, he would need to go. But I can't find the name of that defector to verify the story, so...
CIA propaganda.
Could be. And speaking of CIA propaganda, we have to examine the people involved in Project Stargate very closely.
Yeah, are we gonna name names?
Yes, we are.
Yeah, oh.
Since the 1970s, a number of people with very high security clearances have been working on UFO phenomena. They were interacting with each other so much they gave themselves code names. The code names were all birds, so they called themselves the Aviary.
Cute.
Well, let's start with the owl. Psychic research begins with Harold Hal Puthoff in the early 1970s at SRI, the Stanford Research Institute. We know that Puthoff worked with the CIA on Project Stargate, but the owl has worked on and off for the CIA and the Defense Intelligence Agency for years. But most of his work happened after he left the Church of Scientology. You bleep me?
Well, you know we can't say the S word. They sue people.
Fair enough.
Well, how high did the owl get in the Church of Tom Cruise?
Well, OT7. That was the top level at the time.
Yikes. Oh, congratulations. What a nice achievement.
Hey, I'm just giving information. I'm not making judgments.
I am.
Puthoff is also involved in UFOs. He founded To the Stars, a private venture investigating UFOs. Also on the board of To the Stars is Christopher Mellon, who's also former CIA and DIA, and Steve Justice, former director of advanced systems development at Lockheed Martin, and Luis Elizondo, a former intelligence officer who says he ran ATIP. ATIP, or the Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program, essentially continued Project Blue Book. Elizondo says he ran this program. The Pentagon says he had nothing to do with it. Elizondo says this is a smear campaign. Pop quiz. Who do you believe? An intelligence officer or an intelligence agency?
Neither.
Correct. Next, Blue Jay. Dr. Kit Green also worked on Stargate, and he was a CIA analyst. In 2001, leaked emails showed that Dr. Green said the infamous alien autopsy video was true.
It was.
Well, it was a film produced in 1995, a hoax. Later, Green said that he never said it was real. He said the still shot of the face looked real. So, which is it? Next bird. Falcon. Falcon is the infamous Richard Doty. Doty was a special agent for the Air Force OSI, the Office of Special Investigations. He was in charge of UFO disinformation programs. One of Doty's assignments was to infiltrate the UFO community and flood it with as much disinformation as possible. This way people would know what to believe. Bill Moore, a well-known UFO author, destroyed his career in a single afternoon. He publicly said he was taking payments from the government via Doty and helping spread lies. He was essentially booed off the stage, and we haven't heard much from him since. But Doty has since come forward and said UFOs are real, and that most of the UFO stories we hear are real.
And that's what is so disgusting and troubling within the UFO community. That's why I have nothing to do with them anymore. I've tried. I've went to UFO conventions and tried to explain what the truth is, and nobody wants to hear you because they've written a book that says it happened this way, and they're not going to listen to you, even though they really don't know the truth.
Is he telling the truth now? Who knows? Our next bird is Woodpecker. Woodpecker is Jamie Shandera, a film producer. He's considered one of the birds who wants UFO disclosure, so there are good guys and bad guys in the aviary. But enter Bob Collins, aka Condor. Bob Collins is also a former intelligence agent with OSI who engaged in UFO disinformation campaigns. In 1989, a documentary was released called UFO Cover-Up Live. Shandera was featured in that documentary, but this TV program got people asking questions. Many in the UFO community consider the doc to be nothing but a disinformation campaign, and it's easy to see why. Bob Collins,
Condor.
Right. He stated in his book that after the documentary, he attended what he called a mini summit. This was a meeting to deal with the fallout of the TV show. At the summit was the Owl, Hal Puthoff, Falcon, Richard Doty, Blue Jay, Kit Green, and Bill Moore, who was being paid by the government to lie to the public about UFOs. According to Collins' book, quote, Kit Green took center stage by proposing several lines of attack involving disclosure strategies. So are they on the side of disclosure or disinformation? There's more. You might remember my episode on Project Serpo. This was an exchange program between the United States and aliens from the planet Serpo. It's a great story, and by the way, all these are linked below. Now, it took a long time, but the planet Serpo story was found to be a hoax perpetrated by what came to be known as the Team of Five. Two of the five were Victor Martinez and Bill Ryan, who ran the website disseminating the information. The information came from three men, Owl, Falcon, and Blue Jay, Puthoff, Doty, and Green. Once again, Doty later said Serpo is true, and it may be. But in telling the story, the Team of Five got caught telling all kinds of other lies. But some of the lies they say are true. I get into all this in the episode. And by the way, Bob Lazar and a few other whistleblowers also say Serpo is true, so you make the call. But birds of a feather stick together. Neither talk about it much, but for years, Doty, aka the Falcon, worked for Puthoff, aka the Owl. Doty spent 10 years as a private contractor for Puthoff's company, EarthTech. EarthTech worked with the US intelligence community on black programs. Don't take my word for it, here's how.
The particular area that I took responsibility for is based on this. There was a critical issue. As you can well imagine, in these deep black programs, it's difficult for contractors to obtain expert opinion on critical technologies because there's such high level security and there's compartmentalization. We call it stovepiping. And so I was contracted to commission papers from experts around the globe. And since we didn't want to be in the position of going out and say, hey, we're trying to figure out this UFO thing, can you help us out here? I mean, the publicity associated with that in our black program would have been a disaster.
Here's something else. In 2006, a book came out that blew the whistle on everything. It's called The Black World of UFOs, Exempt from Disclosure. It talks about government cover-ups, sensitive DIA and CIA documents, reverse engineering alien spacecraft. All the great UFO stories are in this book.
I love it. What's the problem?
It was written by Collins and Doty.
Condor and Falcon.
Yep.
Yeah.
Look, I believe UFOs exist, and I believe we have recovered craft. But I'm skeptical of anyone who's worked in intelligence, because once you're in, you're never out. Whatever's being said about UFOs by people like Doty, Puthoff, Elizondo, David Grush, I take all that with a grain of salt. These are not whistleblowers. These are people who spent most of their careers in intelligence. The things they say, they're allowed to say. They have permission.
Permission from who?
Well, isn't that the big question? Pat Price, the psychic who started it all, comes off as the most credible of all the people I talked about today. He was a retired cop from a small town. He used his gift to solve crimes, to help people. And Pat was a patriot. The CIA asked for help, and he provided it. 4 months later, Pat was dead. In my research, I found something Pat Price said that bothered me. He said this: people have infiltrated all government in sensitive positions, not to control government, the processes, or people, but rather to be in positions of power, to stop politically any activity that may produce a result that could cause discovery. Americans want information about UFOs released. Congress tried and couldn't do it. Presidents have tried and couldn't do it. So if our elected leaders aren't in charge, who is? During Stargate, it was discovered that anyone can learn remote viewing. Some people like Joe McMoneagle and Pat Price are naturally gifted, but the rest of us, with practice and training, it's a skill we can all develop. But that would mean the end of all secrets. That can't be allowed to happen. Secrets are the source of their power, whoever they are. And that's why Stargate was shut down. Not because it failed, because it worked. Now, it's pretty much an open secret that something is going on underneath those mountains in Alaska, but there's no roads in or out. The only way to investigate is to fly in. And that's what the great investigator James Fox did.
There has been controversy swirling around for decades as to some sort of secret underground potential alien base. So that's why I'm here to go and check out Mount Hayes and see if any of the accounts over the last several decades are remotely true.
Okay, we're gonna stay in Alaska for this next one. I gotta look up, yes, specifically in the Alaska Triangle. I have a few episodes about that, where planes and people have gone missing for years, like thousands of them. Anyway, it wasn't until I began researching these episodes that I saw a recurring theme, is that there is something buried underneath the mountains in Alaska. But what I didn't expect is that there were going to be facilities that were joint operations between the US military and alien races. But it seems like that's what they are. So this next episode is about one of those bases. This is the Black Pyramid of Alaska.
+15+00.
In September 1989, Doug Muchler reported for duty. He was a counterintelligence officer stationed at Fort Richardson, just outside Anchorage, Alaska. His job was investigating espionage and terrorism, so his first stop was the map room. He needed to get the lay of the land. Doug grew up in Ohio, so learning about the rugged terrain and wilderness of Alaska would take a lot of studying. Alaska is a big place, almost 700,000 square miles, twice the size of Texas. Doug spread out a few maps across the giant table in the center of the room. He scanned the maps. They showed mountain ranges, rivers, lakes, cities, old mining towns, the typical stuff. But then something caught his eye. On a map of Denali National Park, there was an area no bigger than his thumb that was whited out. Doug grabbed a magnifying glass. There were no features. About 60 miles west of Mount McKinley was a small zone labeled, "This area not surveyed to date." Doug thought this was odd. The entire state of Alaska was definitely surveyed, every inch of it. How could this tiny patch be not surveyed? He set the question aside. He was a chief warrant officer in military intelligence. He figured if he needed to know, he'd know. Still, something about that location haunted him. And 3 years later, he'd find out why. It was late 1992, and Doug Muchler was killing time with a few dozen off-duty soldiers. Someone shushed the group and turned up the TV. The local news was running a story about an underground nuclear detonation in China. It was so powerful that it sent shockwaves in the Earth's crust all the way to Alaska. But that wasn't the story. When seismologists analyzed the data, they saw the cross-section of a huge object about 100 feet below the surface in central Alaska. It was a pyramid, a huge pyramid, bigger than the Great Pyramid of Giza, 550 feet tall from the top to the base. The news showed the pyramid's location on a map. Doug wasn't sure, but he could swear it was right in the middle of the location marked, "This area not surveyed to date." He ran to the map room. He was right. Next stop, his quarters. He set his VCR to record the 11 o'clock news. He needed to be sure. The late night news came and went without a single mention of the pyramid. Doug called a few news junkies he knew. Nobody heard anything about it. The next day, with military intelligence credentials, Doug went to the local news station. The station manager said there was no such story and had no idea what Doug was talking about, then returned to his office. Doug stood in the lobby for a minute, confused. Not only did he see the news story, but almost 40 other soldiers did too. The station manager's strange behavior made Doug feel that something wasn't right.
Had a Men in Black stop by.
Well, that's what Doug thought. But this visit was off the books. He had no authority here. As Doug was heading out, he heard a voice behind him. It was one of the younger employees. The kid nervously gestured for Doug to come over, so he did. The younger man was clearly rattled. He looked around, lowered his voice, and said the story was true.
Look, I'm not supposed to say anything. I could get fired for this, but this just isn't sitting right with me.
Doug acted like he wasn't sure what the kid was talking about, but he was pretty sure what he was talking about.
That story about the underground pyramid is real. We ran it during last night's 6 o'clock broadcast. A few hours later, a couple of scary guys in suits came by the station and grilled my boss in his own office. Next thing I know, the story is pulled from the 11 o'clock lineup, and all the tapes of the story were confiscated. It's all gone.
Doug asked why. Although again he knew the answer, he just wanted to hear this kid say it.
After the suits left, the news director said we had to kill the story because it involved a Chinese nuclear test. It was a matter of national security. We were told to forget about it. The nuclear test, the pyramid, all of it. Pretend it never happened or face criminal charges. That's all I know.
The kid begged Doug to keep him out of it, and Doug agreed. Again, as an experienced intelligence officer, Doug knew these tactics. He also knew he shouldn't press the issue with his superiors, so he didn't. But he was annoyed.
I was mad. I went back to the office in formation that night. I told everybody what I'd found out, and the guys in the unit were like, wait a minute, we watched it. What do you mean they didn't run it? Same thing I was saying.
Doug continued his normal duties at Fort Richardson, but he couldn't stop thinking about that pyramid. He was frustrated, but there was no way to get more information. Then, a year later, Doug was transferred to Fort Meade in Maryland, home of the National Security Agency, and that would provide an opportunity. In 1993, Doug Muchler was transferred to Fort Meade, Maryland. Fort Meade is known for being the headquarters of the NSA. Doug said he wasn't working for the NSA, but for a unit nearby.
Oh, he was totally working for the NSA.
Probably. Fort Meade was also home to a giant warehouse of files. Row after row, shelf after shelf, floor after floor. It was a giant archive of government activity, and much of it top secret.
Ooh, like where they keep the Ark and all that stuff?
No, this place was just files.
I'd still like to snoop around there.
So would I. Doug played it cool. He introduced himself to the archivist and showed him his credentials. Doug asked if there were any files about archaeological sites in Alaska. He didn't say pyramid or anything like that. He kept his questions non-specific. The archivist didn't blink. He wrote down a few numbers and handed Doug a slip of paper. The floor, the row, the shelf. Doug was getting closer. He found the Alaska files. He pulled a few and settled into a reading room. But he wouldn't get the chance to learn anything.
Here come the men in black.
And I had just sat down And these two guys came, you can feel someone standing behind you. And these two goons go, "Hey, you don't have a need to know for that information."
Doug turned around and asked what they meant. He was just looking at archaeological sites in Alaska. They said, "We know what you're looking for. You need to leave the building immediately." Doug asks why.
They don't want us messing with them up there anymore. They don't want you messing with them up there. They don't want us, anybody, messing with them.
Wait. Messing with who up there?
Well, that's what Doug wanted to know, but the two guys...
Men in black?
Right. They realized they just said too much. Doug left the warehouse, resumed his duties, and kept quiet. But after he left the service, he went public with the story. It turned out that not only is the pyramid real, the military knows exactly where it is. They also know what the pyramid is.
How?
Because they're the ones operating it.
Yahtzee!
Marty Johnson shook his head and quietly laughed. As an engineer in the Navy during World War II, he worked on more than his share of top-secret projects. But this was something else. He was flown from Omaha, Nebraska to Unalakleet, Alaska, wherever that was, and then rushed onto a white bus with blacked-out windows. On the bus were a few engineers and technicians. Once everyone was settled, the bus started driving east. Nobody was told where they were going or specifically what they were doing. And honestly, Marty didn't care. This was exciting. While most of the passengers seemed nervous, Marty was smiling ear to ear. He felt like a character in a spy novel. After the war, Marty was recruited by Western Electric Manufacturing. Well, technically, he worked for Bell Labs, created from the engineering department of Western Electric and half owned by AT&T. When offered the job, Marty didn't need much convincing. He'd be working on highly classified projects for the military. His specialty was electrical engineering, but Marty Johnson could build or fix anything you threw at him. He liked a challenge, and working on cutting-edge tech was right up his alley. In the late 40s, he worked with transistors. These little devices revolutionized electronics. He had no idea how Bell came up with the idea, but wow, did they change everything.
Aliens gave them the transistors.
Maybe. Well, here it was, 1959, and Marty felt he was helping invent the future. He couldn't tell his family where he was or what he was doing, but they understood that his work, whatever it was very important. After a 6-hour bumpy ride, the bus finally stopped. When the door opened, the cold Alaska air rushed in like a punch in the face. Stepping out of the bus was even more shocking. After 6 hours in the dark, the bright white Alaskan landscape was overpowering. Marty lifted his collar, shielded his eyes, and walked with his colleagues. Once his eyes adjusted, Marty became confused. There was nothing here. Ice, snow, mountains, that's it. Then he heard a shout from up ahead. Two men in uniform stood next to what looked like a concrete shed in the middle of nowhere. Marty would need answers soon. The cold wind was taking the fun out of this adventure. The group shuffled into the shed. The officers came in last and closed the door. In unison, everyone sighed in relief. One of the officers told the group to grab the rail and hold on. He yanked a metal gate across the door and pushed a button. With a quick jerk, the platform began dropping. Now Marty understood. The shed was just an entrance to this elevator shaft. As the elevator descended, the temperature warmed a bit. It was still cold enough to see his breath, but at least they were spared from the biting wind. And after daydreaming a bit, Marty realized they'd been going down for a long time. The elevator finally stopped. The officer opened the gate and gestured for everyone to step out. Marty followed the group out into the hallway. It looked like every military office building he'd ever been in. The gray concrete floor and walls painted green beige, the constant buzzing of overhead fluorescent lights, all too familiar. The group started moving again. Marty felt like he was on a museum tour, just following the crowd. They passed plenty of doors, so this place must be bigger than it looked. The doors had no names, only numbers. Clean, simple, efficient. Definitely military. The officer up front raised his voice a bit so everyone could hear. Before they started their 4-week orientation, they would get to see the project. Finally, Marty thought. Judging by the murmurs in the group, he wasn't the only one becoming impatient. After making a few turns here and there, they reached the end of the hallway. They were standing in front of a huge steel door. It had to be 15 feet high and wide enough to drive a car through. The officer grabbed a red phone receiver off the wall and spoke into it. Marty couldn't hear, but he chuckled to himself as he imagined the officer saying, "Open sesame." From somewhere, there was the sound of metal on metal, and the door began to slowly swing open. Not only was the door tall and wide, it had to be a foot thick. What could be in here that required security measures like this? Was it nukes? Marty hoped it wasn't nukes. They walked through the door into a giant cavern. Then Marty saw it, and everything made sense. The blacked out windows, the secrecy, the security. The officer proudly announced, "Gentlemen, welcome to the Dark Pyramid." In the spring of '78, Lee Pearson was at the Unalakleet Airport trading war stories with a fellow vet. Lee retired and became a teacher, but his new friend, a helicopter pilot, was still in the service. The pilot could tell Lee was missing the excitement of the old days, so he made him an offer. He was making a quick run into the infamous Alaska Triangle.
Lee, I got something that will get your blood pumping. We're taking some important equipment out to a secret base near Denali. You know Mount McKinley? We'll be in and out in 4 hours. You want to tag along?
Lee said absolutely. They hopped in the helicopter and started flying due east. After just under 2 hours of flight time, the pilot gave Lee a heads up.
Okay, we're just about 5 miles out. Things are about to get weird. Our instruments are going to go crazy. You're going to hear all kinds of alarms. Don't panic. And we'll go VFR the rest of the way, and we'll be fine.
VFR?
Visual flight rules. Basically, you turn off autopilot, keep the ground in sight, and keep your eyes open for obstacles.
Got it.
Then the helicopter's electronics went haywire. The radar screen went out. The compass needle was spinning like a fan. Lee was visibly nervous. Then all the power in the helicopter, the instruments, lights, everything went black. But the helicopter kept flying. A few minutes later, it touched down. Within seconds, a ground crew was refueling them, with the engine running and the rotor spinning. Lee looked around. There were a couple of small guardhouses with towers. He saw 2 or 3 Quonset huts. Boxes of equipment were piled here and there. Razor wire was everywhere. Lee looked up. Overhead, a C-130 was flying tight circles over the area. Then 6 men in black uniforms start yanking crates of cargo. Lee, being a military man himself, notices the uniforms have no insignia, no unit patches, no rank, no name tape, no identification of any kind. There are men around the perimeter of the landing zone. They're heavily armed and aiming at the helicopter. Lee looks behind them. There's a Jeep parked just a few yards away. On top of it is a .50 caliber machine gun. It's loaded, manned, and aimed right at them. Lee glances nervously at the pilot, who gives him a look that says, "Relax, this is normal." In 3, maybe 4 minutes, they're airborne and headed west, back to the airport. Once they get about 5 miles from the site, all the instruments come back on and everything is working perfectly. Lee asks the pilot, "What the hell was that?" The pilot looks at Lee, taps his headset, and holds his finger in front of his mouth.
Yeah, they'd be listening to the radio.
Yep. At a small bar near the airport, the 3 men sit at a quiet table in the back. A waitress drops off a round of beers. Lee grabs one, takes a sip, and says, "Okay, let's hear it."
That place is more secret than the Manhattan Project. Nobody's supposed to know it even exists. Deep underground is a giant pyramid made of black stone. They think it's stone anyway.
Lee asks who would build a giant pyramid underground and why.
All they know is that it's thousands of years old. They've had techs and engineers working there since the 50s. It's a power generator of some kind. And this thing puts out a lot of juice.
This sounded crazy to Lee. He asked how much power does the pyramid generate? The pilot said, enough to power the whole country. Pyramids as power plants. Sounds like science fiction, but if made of the right materials, it could possibly work. I have an entire episode on how the Great Pyramid of Giza could have created energy, and there's scientific evidence that supports this theory.
Pyramid power, link below.
Marty Johnson was very specific about the site and the technology. He said the pyramid was He said the pyramid is 550 feet tall, with the base 700 feet below the surface. The angles of the pyramid were 48 degrees, not 45. I don't know why this is important, but Marty said it was. There were enclosed control rooms at each corner. The control rooms measured the energy flowing through the pyramid. The purpose of the project was energy distribution. If they ever got this to work, we don't know. But Marty Johnson's son said his father built a replica of the pyramid made out of aluminum. He ran a small amount of voltage through the pyramid, and that energy was then magnified. This mini pyramid produced more than enough electricity to power their entire house and farm. It's been theorized that the pyramids in Alaska, Egypt, Indonesia, and other places formed an ancient energy grid. They pulled electricity out of the zero-point field and transmitted it around the planet, maybe even around the solar system.
Free energy cover-up, link below.
Right. I have an entire episode about inventors who discovered ways to pull energy from the quantum field that exists everywhere.
And what happened to those inventors?
All died of mysterious causes. So, is the Dark Pyramid an energy device? We don't know. We have to find it first. And some people think they have. When Doug Muchler went public with his story, he used the perfect conduit. He contacted Linda Moulton Howe. If you follow UFO news or you're a fan of Coast to Coast, you know who Linda is. In case you don't, she's an investigative journalist who's been covering UFOs, aliens, and conspiracies for a long time. She actually won an Emmy for one of her UFO documentaries.
Yo, Linda is the UFO OG.
She is. She's a legend in the field. She also does her homework. So when Doug emailed her, she got copies of his ID, addresses, and phone numbers. But most importantly, she wanted a copy of his DD-214.
Oh, well, obviously.
Oh, you know what a DD-214 is?
Of course I do.
Well, then tell the people.
No. I don't want to step on your fins. You go ahead.
DD Form 214 is a certificate from the U.S. military that lists everything about your service. The date and place of duty, the date and place of release, assignments, rank, education, MOS, job specialty, decorations, medals, everything. Doug Muchler produced this document. He was telling the truth. Once Linda reported on the pyramid, other people started coming forward with their own accounts of the Dark Pyramid. Marty Johnson and Lee Pearson's stories come from their sons who heard them firsthand. Linda heard from a retired naval captain stationed in Alaska. He noticed that aircraft communications always malfunctioned when flying over a certain area, east of Unalakleet and west of Mount Denali. Radar showed massive electromagnetic energy coming from the area. When the captain saw the report about the Chinese nuclear test, he thought the pyramid could be the problem, so he did the logical thing. He reported it to his superior officer.
Stupid.
Soon after, he was told to be quiet or face court-martial.
Told ya.
Lee Pearson's son, Bruce, believes his father's story. In fact, he thinks his father gave him enough information to find the location of the Dark Pyramid. So Bruce took that information, went to Alaska, hired a plane, and he might have found it. Bruce Pearson's father said the Dark Pyramid was east of Unalakleet and west of Mount Denali, so Bruce hired a pilot to take him to that location. If the base was out there, there would be signs of human activity. After almost 2 hours of flying, they came across a patch of land that looked squared off.
Go back over that spot again. Yeah. That's not natural. That is not natural.
It's not a perfect square, but there are right angles and straight lines. When they came around for another pass, they found the remains of an old road. a road that doesn't appear on any maps. And the most amazing discovery of all, they found an old airstrip. This also does not appear on any maps. So at some point in the past, somebody was using that road and airstrip for something. The nearest marked road is almost 100 miles away. This area is also pretty close to coordinates sent to Linda Moulton Howe by another retired Navy officer. This is the location. Using Google Earth, some people claim they can see an outline of a former compound or structure. I'm not sure I can make anything out, but I linked the coordinates below if you want to see for yourself. One man actually hiked to the coordinates to see with his own eyes. In May 2020, Nathan Campbell hired a plane to fly him to Carey Lake in Denali National Park, just a few miles from the pyramid's alleged location. He told the pilot to pick him up at the same location in 4 months.
4 months?
Yep, but Nathan was prepared. He had good gear, plenty of food, and a satellite communicator to let him radio his family. But after just a few weeks, he stopped checking in. A search team found his campsite. His gear was still there, but no Nathan. He kept a diary. The last entry said, "Went to get water." He's never been found. Some speculate that he actually was found, that he discovered the location of the Dark Pyramid and was deleted. But something to keep in mind, the location of the Dark Pyramid is in the Alaska Triangle.
Ah! The underground base!
Yep. For 20 years, the CIA operated Project Stargate. This was essentially a psychic spy project. Stargate did a lot of different things, but its primary focus was remote viewing. Remote viewing is projecting your consciousness to any place on Earth.
Project Stargate link below. But if you were psychic, you already knew that.
One of the most talented remote viewers was Pat Price. Pat was able to see an underground base hidden inside a mountain right in the middle of the Alaska Triangle, Mount Hayes.
Mount motherfucking Hayes.
Okay, that's enough.
Mount motherfucking Hayes link below.
Pat discovered that the base was operated by humans and aliens working together. I bring this up because Linda Moulton Howe found a witness who remote viewed the Dark Pyramid. She first saw a small building. She went in. Then she saw an elevator that went hundreds of feet down. She followed that. Then she found herself in what looked like a military facility. There was a lab. Then she saw a huge black sloped wall. She pulled away a bit. It was the Dark Pyramid. All around the pyramid was equipment, lights, people working. It was very busy. She scanned the area and found a network of hallways and tunnels. She saw offices, sleeping areas, a kitchen. Finally, she found herself with a group of people being taken on a tour by the facility's leader. She was stunned. The tour guide was not human. It was human-like, but definitely not human. Then she learned the true purpose of the Dark Pyramid. It is an energy device. It's a charging station for UFOs. There have been over 6,500 UFO sightings in the Alaska Triangle. It's one of the most active UFO hotspots in the world, and now we know why. The craft are using the pyramid for energy, and that's why the military never got it to work, and they never will. The aliens in charge don't work for us. We work for them. When Linda Moulton Howe exposed the Dark Pyramid in 2012, the story was a phenomenon. And it's easy to see why. We've got credible witnesses and evidence of human activity in the middle of the Alaskan wilderness. Thousands of people really do go missing in Alaska every year. There really are thousands of UFO sightings there. But is the Dark Pyramid real? Well, let's dissect it. Our first witness is Douglas Muchler, a former military intelligence officer. Now, believers in the story say he's a very credible witness. He's provided documents that prove he is exactly who he says he is. That's true. But if you follow this channel, you know how I feel about whistleblowers from military intelligence. I don't trust them. I'm not saying every one of them or any one of them is lying, but some of them are. We know Richard Doty's shady history of spreading disinformation within the UFO community. Hal Puthoff, Christopher Mellon, Luis Elizondo, David Grush, and now Doug Muchler, all whistleblowers, all connected to military intelligence. Now, I'm not saying Doug Muchler is lying, but I do view his story skeptically. In his defense, the Chinese did detonate an underground nuke on May 22, 1992, but that's 5 or 6 months earlier than Doug claims. But he waited 20 years to come forward. Maybe some of his details are hazy. He said almost 40 other soldiers saw the news report about the underground pyramid. None of those soldiers have come forward. If you go to Linda's website, earthfiles.com, you could see the original emails Doug sent to her. The details change a little over time. At some point, he says China informed the UN about the underground test. That didn't happen. When the nuke went off in May, the world was taken by surprise, and the UN condemned the test. Still, he says this happened late November, early December 1992. There was no nuclear test done then. There just wasn't. So there'd be no news report of it. But what's interesting is there was a major earthquake in Egypt in October 1992. The earthquake was a 5.3, the highest ever recorded in the area. At least 500 people died. The UN did come in to provide aid and monitor any damage to the ancient sites. There was news coverage of that for weeks because people were worried about the Sphinx and the pyramids. Now, it's possible, it's even likely, that Doug is conflating a few different memories. And there's no shame in that. Human memory is notoriously bad. But what about Lee Pearson and his son Bruce? Well, we only have Bruce's word. Same with Marty Johnson. These were real people, no doubt, but they haven't given us any physical evidence, only their word. And what about remote viewers? Do you believe them? For the most part, I don't. But I do believe Pat Price saw something under Mount... Not only do I believe in Pat Price's ability, I believe he was killed because of it. Check out the episode on Project 8200. I get into all the details. The last and most important name in the story is Linda Moulton Howe. I followed her work for years. She was great whenever she was on Coast to Coast with Art Bell. But she is a true believer. Yes, she does her homework, but she goes into a story believing it, and she focuses on investigating details to support the story. Lots of UFO and paranormal researchers do this. Almost all of them do. I approach these stories from the other side. I go in not believing, but I don't focus on debunking. I honestly try to find as much evidence as I can to defend a hard-to-believe story. Sometimes after researching, I'll change my mind. I thought the hollow moon theory was nonsense until I did an episode on it. Now I'm pretty sure the moon is weird. I thought crop circles were 100% man-made, but after researching, I can tell you this for sure. Almost 100% are man-made. But there are a few that can't be explained or debunked. They just can't. I don't know if there's a pyramid buried in Alaska, but if there is, I'm pretty sure it can generate energy, just like the Great Pyramid of Giza did when the Anunnaki built it 130,000 years ago. Prove me wrong. That is still one of my favorite episodes. Now we're going to go all the way back to the beginning to episode number 22 about Mount Rushmore. And this one's only 6 minutes long, but it feels a lot longer than that.
3+15+00.
It's one of the most recognizable and most visited landmarks in America. But Mount Rushmore has a secret. The sculpture, which famously depicts 4 former U.S. presidents as 60-foot granite faces, was constructed between 1927 and 1941 under the direction of architect Gutzon Borglum. Everybody knows that. But few people know about the secret project Borglum was working on as part of the monument. Let's find out why. Freedom, hope, justice. South Dakota's beloved national memorial, Mount Rushmore, is a testament to these deeply cherished American values.
Justice? Tell that to the Indians they stole the land from.
Let's keep it nice.
You got it, Kemosabe.
By the 1920s, South Dakota, now a U.S. state, had become a popular road trip destination for Americans. They drove in to see the newly designed Black Hills National Forest and Wild Cave National Park. Governor Peter Norbeck had also built the Needles Highway, a scenic route winding through the granite formations of the Black Hills. But Doane Robinson, a historian at the South Dakota State Historical Society, believed the state needed a little something more to entice tourists. In 1924, he learned about an attempt to carve the likenesses of Confederate leaders into the side of Stone Mountain in Georgia. So, Robinson launched a campaign to create South Dakota's own monument. Robinson envisioned sort of an ode to the Old West, with historic figures like Lewis and Clark and Lakota leader Red Cloud. And he reached out to Stone Mountain sculptor Gutzon Borglum to transform the granite mountain into what it is today. Now, Borglum became famous for sculptures honoring U.S. history. He was also famous for his flamboyant and bombastic personality. In Georgia, he became involved with the Stone Mountain Project, but soon began to clash with Stone Mountain Memorial Association. And in February 1925, the association fired Borglum, citing mismanagement of funds and his offensive egotism and his delusions of grandeur. Borglum made national news when he destroyed the Stone Mountain models and fled the state.
That sounds perfect for a government project.
Borglum was talked into working on Mount Rushmore because it was a chance at immortality, and he liked the sound of that. So over the next 16 years, Borglum wrestled with the federal government over funding and control of Mount Rushmore, which he technically never completed. Borglum wanted to carve the presidents down to their waists and chisel a description of the memorial next to them. But when it became clear that there wasn't enough space for an inscription or a lot of this stuff, he came up with a new idea. He envisioned a grand hall measuring 80 feet tall and 100 feet long, accessible via an 800-foot granite staircase that would include busts of famous Americans, as well as bronze and glass cabinets containing historical documents like the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, Declaration of Independence, and a massive bronze eagle with a 38-foot wingspan would be mounted above the entrance, with the inscription reading, "The Hall of Records." Now, Borglum believed that future generations might find Mount Rushmore as much a mystery as Stonehenge or the pyramids of Egypt. So he wanted to come up with a way to preserve its history and make sure the story behind the carving would never be forgotten. So the vault was built to be just behind Abraham Lincoln's hairline and would contain all the information anyone would ever need to know about the mountain.
Wait. So they would have to blow a hole in Lincoln's head to do this?
Yeah.
And nobody saw a problem with that.
I never really thought of that.
Sic semper tyrannis.
Work on the Hall of Records began in July 1938, but was halted a year later. Congress wanted construction to focus on the presidents first, before moving on to the hall.
Everyone's got a side project.
I know.
Hey, you want to read my screenplay?
Nope. Despite what Congress said, Borglum, he went ahead with the project anyway. The onset of World War II in 1941 slowed down the vault project. They only got as far as a 70-foot cavern blasted into the mountain. And Borglum was still refining the presidents when his health began to deteriorate. He died on March 6, 1941, leaving his son Lincoln to continue the work. But the project kept running into problems. For example, Jefferson's head couldn't be completed due to the quality of the stone. In fact, Jefferson was originally supposed to be on Washington's right side, but the stone was too weak, so they kind of improvised as they went along. Now, eventually, funding ran out, and the project was declared final and complete on October 31st, 1941.
Finished?
Yep, finished. The statues are incomplete, the inscription was never started, and the rock that was blasted out of the mountain is still lying in a huge pile at the site. They said it was good enough.
Sounds like a government-run project.
So for over 50 years, the Hall of Records was just
a hole in Lincoln's head?
Right. But for decades, Borglum's descendants petitioned the government to complete the room in honor of his work. And finally, in 1998, officials agreed to a scaled-back version of the idea. Today, sculpted into a series of porcelain enamel panels is the story and history of Mount Rushmore, along with an explanation of why Washington, Jefferson, Roosevelt, and Lincoln were chosen. There are also panels sculpted with the text of the U.S. Constitution, the Bill of Rights, the Declaration of Independence, and the Gettysburg Address. Park officials even included a biography of Borglum. They're all kept inside a titanium vault behind a giant 1,200-pound granite slab. Now, the Hall of Records, it's not open to the public. Strict security measures have been put in place following a breach by Greenpeace, who hung a banner reading "Stop Global Warming" over the monument in 2009.
What does Mount Rushmore have to do with global warming?
I honestly have no idea. Even high-ranking officials of the government are banned from seeing this hidden and largely unknown chamber. But its true intent was to serve as a historical record for future civilizations, so we can imagine that Borglum would be pleased to know that his project was finally completed, and may one day do exactly what he intended.
Oh, 6 minutes. Those were the days, huh?
Things were simpler, that's for sure.
Hey, how many views did that video get the first day?
192.
1,000?
No, just 192.
Well, don't feel bad. That video wasn't very good.
Anyway, next is episode number 39 about Dyatlov Pass, which is an incident in which some hikers ran into some grisly misfortune on the mountain. And this is one of the first episodes I was proud of because I think I came up with a plausible explanation for what happened to them. At least, I hope I'm right, because it's pretty gruesome. But this episode does have a touching ending. Enjoy.
3 + 1 5 + 0 0.
When the helicopter rescue team arrived at the Dyatlov Pass in February 1959, the 9 missing hikers had been dead for weeks. The more the investigators tried to piece together what happened, the more the story didn't seem to add up. Their tent had been cut open from the inside and abandoned, but there was no sign of a struggle. And over a half-mile away, 2 victims were almost completely naked, though temperatures were 30 below zero that night. Other bodies were found even farther away. 2 had fractured skulls. 2 more had major chest injuries. 1 was missing his eyes, and another was missing her tongue. And reports show that 2 of the hikers had been exposed to unusually high amounts of radiation. Soviet investigators listed the cause of death as a compelling natural force and closed the case a few weeks later. The Dyatlov Pass incident has been a mystery for over 60 years, and theories include a military cover-up, a KGB operation gone wrong, a Bigfoot attack, and of course, aliens. Now, one researcher believes he knows what happened that night. Others are not so sure. Let's find out why. In the winter of 1959, 9 Russian adventurers were on a 200-mile cross-country hiking expedition making their way through the Siberian wilderness. This was difficult terrain, but the 7 men and 2 women were young, fit, and highly experienced skiers and mountain climbers. They were led by 23-year-old Igor Dyatlov, a promising student studying engineering at the Ural Polytechnic Institute. A few others in the group were classmates of his at UPI. Now, before he left, Dyatlov told his friends back home that he would send them a telegram as soon as the team returned. Well, that letter was never sent, and none of the group was ever seen alive again. The hikers documented everything. They kept journals and they took tons of pictures.
They took selfies?
Tons of them. Now, sure, there was lots of snow and frigid temperatures, but everyone was in good spirits, and things seemed to be going predictably until February 1st. That day, the group was making its way through Dyatlov Pass, though back then it didn't have a name, and as they tried to push through, they were hit with high winds and snow. The decreasing visibility pushed the group off course, and they accidentally ended up on the side of a mountain called Kolatsiakal by the region's indigenous people.
Kulats?
Kolatsiakal.
Right. We got a translation?
Dead Mountain.
Oh boy.
This is a photo of the group, in deep snow with almost zero visibility, digging out a platform for their tent. This is the last photo of them alive. The final entry in the group's diary reads,
"It is difficult to imagine such a comfort on the ridge, with shrill howling wind, hundreds of kilometers away from human settlements."
And then, nothing. During their journey, members of the group sent postcards and letters to family and friends, informing them of their progress. But weeks had gone by without a single word, so people began to worry. On February 26th, almost a month later, a search party was finally able to locate the campsite. And when they did, it was obvious something had gone terribly wrong. The tent, where the entire group slept, was discovered under a thin layer of snow. It had been cut open from the inside, but there was no sign of a struggle. Food, clothes, gear were still neatly stacked inside the tent. A meal had been set up, but the food was untouched. And there were no bodies. The next day, 9 sets of footprints were found leading down the mountain into the woods. The tracks were evenly spaced and they weren't deep. And this told investigators that the group was moving calmly and orderly. They weren't scrambling, they weren't running, and they weren't fighting. But the tracks were odd. They weren't made with boots. the tracks were made by people wearing socks or barefoot in sub-zero temperatures. Searchers then came across a cedar tree where they found the remains of a campfire. And near the fire, buried in the snow, were the first two victims of Dyatlov Pass, Doroshenko and Krivonishenko. They were almost naked, wearing only underwear, though temperatures were 30 degrees below zero that night. Krivonishenko had blackened fingers and third-degree burns on his shins and feet, and for some reason, in his mouth was a chunk of flesh that he had bitten off his right hand. The tree limbs above the fire were broken over 5 meters above the ground, and pieces of flesh were found in the tree bark, and scraps of clothing were found in the branches. Now, why would they climb a tree? Was visibility so poor that they were looking for a way back to the tent? Were they gathering wood for the fire? Or were they trying to get away from something? Rescuers expanded the search area, and about 200 feet away, they found 3 more bodies, including Igor Dyatlov. They were positioned as if they were running away from the tree, trying to get back to the tent. Investigators said all of them had died of hypothermia, as they had no damage except for superficial injuries and what would be caused by exposure to cold. But this doesn't explain why Doroshenko, who was found under the tree, had skin that was brownish purple, or why he had gray foam and gray liquid coming out of his mouth. It didn't explain the burns, the flayed limbs, or why someone would bite off a chunk of their own hand. The second set of bodies was also confusing. One of them had multiple skull fractures consistent with falling and tumbling over and over again, but there were no bloody rocks or stumps or any evidence anywhere that a fall had occurred. The only explanation at this point that despite being highly experienced at outdoor winter survival, they had suddenly fled into the dark and the cold without adequate preparation, and were frantically trying to make do before succumbing to the elements.
That's only 5.
What?
Well, that's only 5 out of 9 hikers. Did they find the other 4?
Well, they did, but not until months later. And when those bodies were discovered, the story gets even stranger. 4 bodies were still missing for months, but in May, when the snow began to melt, a local hunter found a makeshift snow den in the woods about 250 feet from the cedar tree. A deep hole was cut in the snow, and the floor was made of branches. Pieces of clothing were found scattered around the den. Black sweatpants with the right leg cut off, the left half of a woman's sweater. Another search team arrived, and they uncovered the 4 remaining victims, lying together in at least 10 feet of snow. Autopsy reports say that these people died not of exposure, but of massive injuries. And at this point, criminal investigators were brought in to determine if there was foul play. 3 of the bodies had severe injuries, crushed body cavities, broken ribs, and internal hemorrhaging. One had a skull fracture so severe that foul play was eliminated because no human could generate the kind of force to create this level of damage. Instead, the injuries were consistent with being in a car crash or near the explosion of a bomb. But no soft tissue damage was found and no external injuries. A careful inventory of clothing recovered showed that some of the victims were wearing clothes taken or cut off the bodies of the others that died before them.
Avalanche?
Well, that's what they originally thought, but an avalanche would have flattened the whole campsite. But if you look at the photos of the tent the searchers found, you can see that the skis and ski poles are still upright. There was no damage to the tree line, and there was no debris. And people who die of avalanches usually asphyxiate, but post-mortem analysis shows no sign of this. They either died from injuries or died of cold, but either way, when they died, they were still breathing. The locals say that Dyatlov Pass doesn't get avalanches. None were reported before the incident, and none have been reported since. And what's even more strange is 2 of the hikers' eyes were missing, and one of them was missing her tongue.
Avalanches don't do that.
They don't. And maybe the strangest detail of all, 2 of the hikers' clothing had significant levels of radiation.
They were radioactive?
Yep. Now, despite all of this strange evidence, the case went nowhere due to what was called an absence of a guilty party. The investigation was closed a few weeks later. The final conclusion was that the cause of death was an unknown compelling force which the hikers were unable to overcome.
And that was it?
That was it. But the victims' families weren't satisfied, so they started demanding answers from the Soviet government.
How did the Soviets respond?
Well, all files, journals, and photographs were classified. The area was made off limits, and all evidence collected was destroyed.
Of course.
But there's no shortage of theories about what happened.
Ooh, can we?
We can. Theories about what happened at the Dyatlov Pass. There are some good ones. I'll cover a few, but I'll link to the full list in the description. The first theory is...
Aliens?
Be patient.
Sorry. Go ahead.
Remember that a lot of the hikers were students at the Euro Polytechnic Institute or connected with UPI in some way? Well, UPI was constantly turning out recruits for nuclear research and the Soviet military.
Ooh, I like where this is going.
First theory, the KGB connection. Alexei Radikin wrote a book called Dyatlov Pass, where he claimed that 3 of the hikers were KGB agents on a mission to uncover a secret cell of CIA operatives. During the Cold War, a favorite Soviet tactic was to plant radioactive material in places it didn't belong, just to set the Americans on fruitless searches. Now, Radikin says that 2 or 3 of the hikers were hired by the KGB to deliver radioactive tainted clothing to CIA agents. And the oldest member of the group, at age 37, Semyon Zolotaryov, joined the group at the last minute.
Sus.
He was a combat veteran with years of military service who eventually went to work for the NKVD, or the Soviet secret police. And before transferring to the physics department at UPI, he worked in Moscow at a top secret scientific facility known as PO Box 3394. And Yuri Krivonashenko worked at PO Box 404/10, where a massive nuclear accident occurred in 1957. Alexei Radikin is convinced that this group was not gathered by accident. The histories of at least 3 of the hikers show a lot of KGB connection. The true objective of their mission, unknown to the other members, was to deliver radioactive samples to a group of agents of the CIA and take pictures of the spies. At the beginning of the journey, all the hikers had cameras and journals. We saw them. But when Kolevatov's body was discovered, his journal and camera were missing, and he was one of the suspected spies. Now, theory number 2. Like, who's this guy? In 2014, the Discovery Channel released a documentary called Russian Yeti, The Killer Lives, and they used the Dyatlov incident to make their case that the hikers had disturbed the natural habitat of a Yeti, and they used this photo as evidence. The doc went on to say that the Yeti was the reason the bodies were missing eyes and a tongue. Now, this photo has been authenticated. It's absolutely real, but it doesn't look much like a Bigfoot to me, and that documentary was, well, it was garbage. So, next theory.
Aliens?
Ball lightning.
Close enough.
This theory says that the reason for the tent being cut from the inside was not to escape, but to set up a camera on a makeshift tripod. Dyatlov himself had experimented with telescopes and was interested in spaceflight and astronomy. The local Mansi people had reported seeing glowing golden orbs in the sky that same night, and another hiking group camping 50 kilometers away also reported orange floating orbs in the exact same place at the exact same time. There are even recovered photos from one of the cameras that shows some type of lights in the sky. Lev Ivanov, the lead investigator of the incident, said, "I suspected at the time and am almost sure now that these bright flying spheres had a direct connection to the group's death." He also reported that the treetops in the area were burned above a certain height. In 1990, after Ivanov retired, he published an article claiming that the Soviet government forced him to abandon this theory, and they removed everything from the report that mentioned UFOs, orbs, or anything unusual. He insisted the deaths were due to heat rays or balls of fire associated with orbs.
Yes!
Another scientific theory is that a rare weather event generated infrasound that caused the hikers to suddenly become disoriented and anxious. Donnie Eicher, who spent 5 years researching the incident and actually visited the site, believes that a wind phenomenon called a Kármán vortex street could have produced a terrifying, powerful sound, which is proven to induce irrational fear in humans. We have a video about this on the channel. I'll link below.
Nice plug.
Now, if hit with infrasound, the group might have fled the tent and fallen victim to the cold before they realized what was happening. Now, those are just a few of the theories that have been circulating for years. Some say a weapons test went wrong. Others say the military killed the group and staged the scene. Carbon monoxide poisoning is another theory, or a bad mushroom trip, though toxicology reports discount those theories.
If you believe the reports.
If you believe the reports. Nobody has been able to come up with a definitive answer. That is, until this year. 2 scientists think they've solved the mystery of Dyatlov Pass, and they use the movie Frozen to prove their theory.
Did you just say they use Frozen?
Yeah,
The Disney movie?
that's right.
Let it go, let it go. Do. That one?
Yeah, that one.
No, this I gotta hear.
Though the avalanche theory has been mostly dismissed, a new theory has been proposed that the hikers were hit by a very specific and rare kind of avalanche. Johann Gohm, a scientist who studies snow phenomena, was watching the movie Frozen when—
Let it go, let it go. I'm a fish and I like water, let it go.
You done?
I love that movie.
Gohm noticed that Disney had created very realistic snow movement, so he worked with studio animators to develop a model that shows how the group could have been hit by what's called a delayed slab avalanche. And this kind of avalanche occurs when you affect the warm, wet snow at the bottom of a slope. This causes the entire face of snow to eventually move at once. Now think about when you have two books stacked on top of each other. You could tilt them and they'll stick together until you reach a certain angle. The top book slides. Now, an avalanche only requires a 20-degree slope to trigger it. Now, the Dyatlov camp was built at 23 degrees. Gohm believes that when they cut into the snow to build their tent, it started a countdown. They initiated a chain reaction of micro-disturbances that took a few hours to propagate. Now, trapped under the slab, the group might have panicked and cut their way out. The injuries sustained by some of the group would have been consistent with another slab hitting them at full force.
Yeah, but what about all the, the weird stuff?
Well, Gohm says,
we say that this is possible that such a slab avalanche would have injured them the way they were injured. Everything that happened after the avalanche is out of the scope of our paper.
Convenient.
Though it wasn't snowing that night, the hikers did have journal entries about howling winds. These were most likely katabatic winds. And katabatic winds fall down a slope and quickly gain speed due to gravity. And the winds are hurricane force, and they were absolutely detected by local weather stations that night. So the hikers cut their camp into the snow, which disturbed the slab. Then katabatic winds started blowing snow on top of the slab above the tent. And over the course of hours, the weight of the snow above camp reached critical mass, causing the entire slab to fall. Now, using the Disney snow animation, it was shown that just a small avalanche, maybe 5 by 5 meters, would have been enough to cover the camp, but not enough snow that the rescue team would have noticed, especially since they didn't arrive on scene for 26 more days. So, given this new information, can we piece together what happened to Dyatlov and his friends that night? I think we can. KGB, UFOs, orbs of light, these are fun theories, but I think this is what happened. The slab avalanche hits, covering them in a few feet of snow. The 9 campers cut their way out of the tent.
Yeah, but
What?
why leave all this stuff in the tent and then go out in the cold in their skivvies?
Well, it was discovered that they had a second stash of supplies in the forest. So they escape the avalanche, knowing they have backup supplies. They retreat to the trees and start a fire. The young trees at the bottom of the slope were icy and wet, so they climbed the cedar in search of dry wood. But with temperatures 30 below zero, they had very little time to save themselves. The 2 most poorly dressed were probably the first to go. The burned skin, probably from being desperately close to the fire, and with hypothermia setting in, they were losing sensation and didn't realize they were being burned. Krivenashenko, losing feeling and probably becoming delirious, bites his hand to test for sensation, and he dies within an hour. 7 survivors cut the clothes away from their friends and dress themselves in whatever they can scavenge from the bodies. 3 of the group, including Dyatlov, try to make it back to the tent, but the steep incline and loose snow make it a difficult task. They soon freeze to death in the struggle uphill. The remaining 4 decide to build a snow shelter for the night. They find deep snow in a ravine a couple of 100 feet away. But their bad luck continues, and they pick a spot near a fast-running stream that never freezes. The stream cuts away the snow above their shelter, causing the roof to collapse. They're thrown onto the rocky stream bed and buried under 10 or 15 feet of snow. Now, in general, snow weighs about 20 pounds per cubic foot, a little over a pound per inch of depth. A section of snow that's 20 feet by 20 feet with a depth of 10 feet, that weighs between 85,000 and 100,000 pounds. That's 50 tons falling on you. So it's like being crushed under a tank, so your injuries would be severe. The missing eyes and tongue probably caused by scavenging animals or just by 3 months of decomposition near running water.
What about the radiation?
Right. The lanterns they used, which were found at the site, contained small amounts of thorium, which is radioactive. And remember, at least 2 of the hikers worked at a nuclear facility and helped with cleanup after an accident that was almost as bad as Chernobyl. So, in retrospect, the 9 campers made only one mistake: the placement of the tent. Everything else was by the book. They conducted an orderly evacuation to safer ground, They took shelter in the woods, started a fire, and dug out a snow cave. The textbook wrong decision in an avalanche is to stay put. Unfortunately, that wrong decision might have saved their lives. Now, today, Dyatlov Pass is a popular tourist destination. People come from all over the world to follow the group's footsteps and see where the tent once stood. People say prayers at the stream and leave flowers under the cedar tree where its broken branches are still visible. And just before the team embarked on their adventure, Krivonishenko wrote a poem addressing the entire group.
Here's wishing you camps pitched on mounts afar, routes to hike over ranges untamed, packs that as ever rest lightly on your backs, and weather that smiles upon your quest, and let your footprints trace winding tracks across the map of Russia.
It's been over 60 years since Dyatlov and 8 of his courageous friends died on Dead Mountain. But I'm sure they'd be proud to know that not only did they leave their footprints on the map of Russia, but on the map of the entire world. All right, let's change the tone a little bit. Next is another old episode, number 21, The Science of Ancient Acoustic Levitation. This is a theory that tries to explain how ancient people were able to move these giant stone blocks, like to build the pyramid, Coral Castle, the Temple of Jupiter. Now, I know officially the Great Pyramid was built using ramps. Yeah, I don't know about that either. But it's very possible they were built by sound. And it's possible they were not built by Egyptians.
3+15+00.
Ancient civilizations possessed knowledge that has been lost to time. I think that's obvious. But to be fair, most lost knowledge is probably not practical to us today anyway. I mean, who cares what bacterial infection some ancient Swami cured with pine nuts and prayer when we could just use an antibiotic? And if some shaman or witch doctor discovered how I can make Windows not update the very second I start a Zoom call, well, I'd love to know that secret. But shaman are typically Mac people, so not a problem for them. But what about ancient technologies that would be of practical use today? Like levitation, specifically levitating large, heavy objects. Now that would be useful. Many people believe levitation, specifically sound or acoustic levitation, was how ancient civilizations like the Egyptians built the pyramids. There's actual science that supports this. Let's find out why. The ruins of several ancient civilizations like the pyramids of Giza, Stonehenge in the UK, and many others are monuments constructed of massive stones. And the first question we have to ask is, why? Why use huge, ridiculously heavy pieces of stone when the same structures could have been made with smaller blocks, like bricks?
Yeah, they were showing off.
But we're looking at that question through a modern lens, based on the technologies that are available to us today. We do know that sound can levitate objects, and I'll get into how that works a little bit later, but current acoustic levitation technology can only move tiny objects with very little mass. Nobody's building pyramids at MIT. And if you are, awesome. Some researchers think ancient cultures may have mastered levitation through sound, which allowed them to easily manipulate massive objects.
Hokey religions and ancient weapons are no match for a good blaster at your side, kid.
Yes, the Jedi were an ancient culture, but let's look at cultures in our own galaxy. How the Great Pyramids of Egypt were built has been the subject of debate for a long time.
Aliens.
The fact is, no one really knows for certain how they were constructed.
Oh, the aliens know.
The mainstream theory is that it took a workforce of about 5,000 men and 20 years to build the Great Pyramid using ropes, pulleys, ramps, and cranes. And that may very well be the case, though I have my doubts. And if you guys want a whole video on the construction of the pyramids, let me know in the comments. There's a lot to cover about pyramids. For example, they weren't built by slaves.
Aliens don't need slaves.
Can we cool it with the aliens for just a minute? But let's talk about the 10th century historian Abul Hassan Ali al-Masudi. He's known as the Herodotus of the Arabs. And al-Masudi traveled all over the world, but finally settled in Egypt, where he wrote a 30-volume history of the world. Like everyone, he was awestruck by the pyramids, and he wrote a very intriguing passage about how the giant stone blocks were transported. First, magic papyrus was imprinted with symbols and placed under each stone. Then the stone was struck with a metal rod that caused it to slowly rise above the ground. The stone then moved along a path that was paved with other stones and fenced in by metal poles. The stone traveled along this path for about 50 meters, then gently settled to the ground. And this process was then repeated over and over again until the builders had the stone exactly where they wanted it. Now, some believe metal poles could have been used to create high-frequency sound vibrations, which would have been responsible for creating the levitation effects. Now, given that the pyramids were already thousands of years old when al-Masudi wrote this, we have to wonder where he got his information. Was this an oral history passed down through the generations, or just a great story created by a talented writer?
Can I make a quick point?
Go ahead.
May I refer you to Clarke's third law?
Right. Clarke's third law says any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic.
Bingo.
The Great Pyramid of Giza does possess some extraordinary acoustic properties and can dramatically amplify sounds at certain frequencies. So the Egyptians clearly knew a lot about sound science and how it could be used to produce powerful effects, possibly including levitation. Did striking the rock create vibrations that resulted in sonic levitation? Maybe the layout of stones and rods created some kind of magnetic levitation. The science for either scenario is sufficiently advanced, and therefore, to al-Masudi and to us, is indistinguishable from magic. Now, the pyramids aren't the only ancient structures made of huge stone blocks. There are monuments around the world that contain stone components of such incredible size that they make the pyramids look tiny, but their construction remains a mystery. Let's look at a few more. The Temple of Jupiter at Baalbek, Lebanon contains the 3 largest stone blocks ever used in a man-made structure. Each block is estimated to weigh as much as 1,000 tons. Now, no industrial equipment in existence today could lift one, no super crane, and certainly no number of people, yet somehow they are positioned together so precisely that a sheet of paper can't fit between them. Now, nearby is an even bigger stone. It's known as Hajar el-Hibla, and it's the largest piece of stone ever cut by humans. It weighs 1,200 tons. It's estimated it would take 16,000 men to even budge it, and it would be a huge challenge of modern technology to just create it, yet there it is. How did they do it? Nobody really knows. Let's go to the other side of the planet. On a remote plateau in Bolivia, 12,000 feet above sea level, there's a monument called Puerta del Sol, or Gate of the Sun. This elaborately carved megalith is a single piece of stone that weighs 10 tons. Cool. Well, how did it end up almost 4 kilometers up a mountain? And some scientists think that it may not be in its original location. And if that's so, where did it come from? Here's another. Nam Madal is an archaeological site on the island of Pohnpei in Micronesia, and it's been called the Machu Picchu of the Pacific. It's the only ancient city ever built upon a coral reef, and the engineering of Nam Madal is so complex, nobody can figure out how it was built. The lost city dates back to around 200 BC, and it's made up of hundreds of stacked stone logs, each about 3 meters long and about 1 meter in diameter. The logs, which are stacked kind of like firewood, create walls that are 40 feet high and 18 feet thick. That's taller than a 3-story building, yet each stone log weighs about 2.5 tons. And the logs that make up the high walls, they weigh as much as 50 tons each. How they were moved and lifted into position is absolutely baffling. The locals didn't have pulleys, they didn't have levers, they didn't even have access to metal. This is Stone Age technology, so how did they do it? Well, the locals tell stories about giants who flew great canoes in the sky.
Aliens.
And those aliens, I mean giants, use some kind of magic to levitate the logs into place. Now, these are structures from very different and diverse cultures from all over the world. What was their secret? Well, these societies are so old that there is no record of how these structures were constructed. But in almost every culture where megaliths exist, a legend also exists that the huge stones were moved by sound, either by striking with a rod to produce acoustic resonance, or by instruments, or by simply chanting stones into position. Let's see how that works. For centuries, travelers from the Far East told tales of acoustic levitation. Some claim to have encountered mystics who possessed the ability to levitate themselves and objects using sound. One famous story comes from a medical doctor named Dr. Yall. He had been brought to a remote area of Tibet in 1939 to treat a Buddhist holy man suffering from an unknown illness. After spending some time with the monks, Dr. Yal eventually gained their confidence, and to show their appreciation, they performed a demonstration of sonic levitation that left the good doctor astounded. They took him to a meadow that was surrounded by high cliffs, and in the middle of the clearing, about 250 meters from a cliff, was a heavy slab of stone. Then the monks arranged 19 musical instruments, 13 drums and 6 trumpets, in a 90-degree arc around the stone and started playing. The other monks began singing and chanting a prayer, slowly increasing the tempo. During the first 4 minutes, nothing happened. Then as the speed of the drumming and the noise increased, the big stone block started to rock and sway and suddenly took off into the air and continued to rise until it landed on a hilltop about 250 meters above the ground. This demonstration was repeated multiple times for Dr. Jarl, who actually took film footage of this.
What? Where's the film?
Oh, that's confiscated and classified.
Well, that's a piece of bullshit.
I know. I actually found a paper that explains scientifically how this levitation might have actually worked. Link below. And if you're into geometry and geodetics, you're gonna love it.
Sounds moving. You see what I did there?
Another creation credited with acoustic levitation is the Coral Castle located in Florida. The Coral Castle is a sprawling stone compound built by Edward Leedskalnin between the years 1923 and 1951. The complex is constructed of nearly 1,000 tons of rock, which Leedskalnin somehow cut, shaped, lifted, and maneuvered into place, all by himself. Just him. Now, FYI, he was 5 foot tall and weighed 100 pounds.
Ant-Man!
I ruined the moment, didn't I?
Leedskalnin refused to allow visitors or observers on site while he was working, so there are no eyewitness accounts detailing his construction methods. Yet, alone, working mostly at night, he was somehow able to cut and transport 1,000 tons of rock to use for walls and towers. He also built all kinds of buildings and sculptures, all from giant pieces of stone. An obelisk he raised weighs 28 tons, and the largest rock on the property weighs an estimated 35 tons. Now, some of these stones are twice the weight of the largest blocks in the Great Pyramid of Giza. All this he did alone and without heavy machinery. The most amazing thing to me is the stone gate. It weighs 9 tons and has about 1/4 inch of clearance inside the frame. It's so well balanced that you could push it open with a single finger. This is something that would be challenging for even the most experienced engineering and construction team. Yet somehow Leedskalnin was able to do it alone.
Oh, this guy definitely wasn't union.
Nope. Leedskalnin never specifically identified sound as a key factor in his work, but he had an interest in radio and owned all kinds of sound equipment which he used for unknown purposes. Now, no one ever saw him lift enormous objects, though the story goes that spying teenagers saw him float coral blocks through the air like hydrogen balloons.
I love this guy.
I do too.
I have discovered the secrets of the pyramids and have found out how the Egyptians and the ancient builders in Peru, Yucatan, and Asia, with only primitive tools, raised and set in place blocks of stone weighing many tons.
He told friends ancient masters had developed a method for overcoming the force of gravity, and that as a practicing Freemason, he was exposed to this knowledge through his contacts in that secret organization.
This guy built an Illuminati sandcastle with magnets?
He might have. With magnets or sound or both. I mean, there's actual science behind some of this. And unless you're in a vacuum, sound is everywhere. Sound is created by vibrating molecules of a medium, like air or water, into waves. The waves hit our eardrums or our skull, and our brain decodes the wavelengths into sound. We don't usually think of sound as having a physical presence, but acoustic waves can absolutely affect the environment. Think of a nightclub or a concert where you could feel the bass. Right. Like that. Or how ultrasound is used to pulverize kidney stones, or how singing the right note or wavelength with a sufficient volume or amplitude can shatter glass. There are even sound waves that can make people sick. We've got a video coming up on this, so
hit subscribe, hit the bell,
okay.
like, share.
Okay. Don't oversell it.
Sorry, I get excited.
Anyway, current acoustic levitation techniques use sound traveling through media, usually gas, to counteract the force of gravity. A basic acoustic levitator has two main parts: a transducer, which is really just the surface that creates the sound by vibrating, kind of like a speaker. And there's also a reflector, which helps focus the sound waves on the object you want to levitate. Now, to get this to work, there's quite a bit of math involved. For example, the distance between the transducer and the reflector must be a multiple of half of the wavelength of the sound. Now, this is because you need to get enough molecules lined up under the object in order to lift it. If you just blast sound at an object, all you're doing is scattering a bunch of molecules around. That won't work. But if we remember the story about the Tibetan monks, they were using this precise technique. They played specific instruments in unison, just like a transducer, focused at a specific object from a specific distance, like a reflector. I bet if we knew the actual sounds of their instruments, we'd see a correlation between the wavelengths they emitted and the distance to the stone. Now, I'm not saying the monks actually got this to work, but I am saying the science is sound.
A pun?
No.
That was so terrible. Oh,
No, I didn't mean to do that. It was...
Oh, shame on you.
So now that we've seen that sound can be used to move objects, is this enough evidence to prove how the pyramids were constructed? For some people, yes. For most, no. For me, I'm not really sure. Could the pyramids have been constructed using pulleys, ramps, and cranes, like mainstream Egyptologists claim? Well, sure. But when you look at the sheer size those ramps would need to be, and the distances involved, the amount of materials required to build the scaffolding would be more than the material in the actual pyramids. Much more. So where are all the construction materials? To me, there seems like there's something going on here. But we can't even talk about this without being labeled kooks. Any challenge of established scientific dogma is labeled pseudoscience. Isn't that a bit arrogant? I mean, isn't pseudoscience only pseudoscience until it's actual science? But people are afraid to go up against the establishment. Kepler and Copernicus were ridiculed by their peers. Louis Pasteur's research was rejected by the medical establishment. Gregor Mendel, Nikola Tesla, initially they were rejected. Imagine the hate they'd get if Twitter existed? But that's a long time ago. Surely we've matured since then. Think about this. In 1903, when the Wright brothers and others were building airplanes, the New York Times said manned flight would not be possible for 1 to 10 million years.
Oops.
And in 1985, the New York Times said no matter how inexpensive or powerful a laptop computer would become, nobody would want one.
No, boy.
And when Apple announced the iPhone, the Times said they'd probably never build it, and even if they did, nobody would buy it.
Oy-vey.
And speaking of Twitter, here's what the New York Times said when it launched.
Using Twitter for literate communication is about as likely as firing up a CB radio and hearing some guy recite the Iliad. Whether the service could be made into a sustainable business, quite unknown. I'm skeptical. Blah, 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 blah.
Haven't I always told you, don't trust the media?
You have. If you suggest that levitating heavy objects with sound or creating free energy is even possible, you're viciously attacked. Not just by Facebook and Twitter, but by the New York freaking Times. Aren't new ideas worth exploring? Did Steve Jobs care what people thought about him? Does Elon Musk care? No. They just went out and changed the world. So my message today is not to the corporate media or social media. They make money by getting all of us to attack each other. That's their business model. It's shameful, and that's why nobody trusts them. Who cares? George Bernard Shaw said, all great truths begin as blasphemies. This message is to those blasphemers, to the recluse out there building castles with sound and magnets and his own hands, to the nerd in the garage tinkering with electronics because he knows in his heart there is a better way. This message is to the next Kepler, Jobs, Elon Musk, to the misfits and dreamers and visionaries. My message is to you. They are going to attack you. They are going to hate you. Ignore them. Keep dreaming. Keep building. Keep blaspheming. Because I can tell you with 100% certainty, the world needs you much more than it needs the New York Times. I think that is another episode we could probably revisit and expand on, now that I'm allowed to do episodes longer than 18 minutes. Anyway, we're up to our last one. We made it. Oh, I'm sorry, I shouldn't be screaming because most of you are asleep. Episode 81 is next. It's about how the Great Pyramid of Giza could have been a power plant. And I know if you haven't seen the episode, that sounds far-fetched, but I will explain scientifically how through chemical reactions, it absolutely could have been possible. This is a fun one.
15+00.
Nikola Tesla believed that he could harness the energy from inside the Earth and transmit that power wirelessly around the world. His early experiments were successful, but his research mysteriously vanished after his death. There is no evidence left of Tesla's wireless power technology. Or is there? For years, we were taught that the Great Pyramid of Giza was a tomb for a king. It wasn't. It had a different purpose. Tesla didn't invent wireless power. It's been here for 5,000 years, and probably a lot longer than that. Okay, why were the pyramids built?
Storage for dead mummies?
Dead mummies?
It's a tautology.
Mainstream Egyptology says that the Great Pyramid of Giza is a tomb built for Khufu, the 4th dynasty Egyptian pharaoh who ruled 4,500 years ago. But the Great Pyramid doesn't have any characteristics of other Egyptian tombs. The Great Pyramid contains no artifacts, no hieroglyphs, and no elaborate wall art. It's been argued that the granite sarcophagus found in the king's chamber once contained Khufu's mummy. There's no evidence that a mummy was ever there. No mummy has ever been found in any pyramid, ever. Ancient Egyptians considered their pharaohs gods. The Great Pyramid is a strange structure for a god. Small chambers, narrow shafts, no markings at all. The way the pyramid was built and the materials used to build it suggest it had a different purpose. The sides of the pyramid are aligned with the compass with such accuracy that only modern engineering can match it. The Great Pyramid is a mountain made of 2.5 million blocks of stone weighing 6 million tons, piled 481 feet high. Its footprint is over 13 acres. To align this construction within 1/15th of a degree of true north is impossible precision. The base of the Great Pyramid is leveled to within 3/4 of an inch. The only way to do this with modern structures is to use lasers. Even though the sides of the pyramid are over 755 feet long, made of stone blocks weighing between 2 and 40 tons each side is within 2 inches of any other. That's 99.98% accurate. Fun fact, the pyramid doesn't have 4 sides. It actually has 8. Each side is slightly concave that you can only really see from directly above, or when the pyramid casts shadows during the equinoxes. And yes, those angles too are perfect. Whoever built the pyramids somehow knew the size of the Earth. If you take the height of the pyramid and multiply it by 43,200, you get 3,938.685 miles, which is within 11 miles of the polar radius of the planet. That's 99.7% accurate. If you take the perimeter of the base of the pyramid and multiply that by 43,200, you get 24,734.94 miles. That's the Earth's circumference at the equator within 99.3% accuracy. We know that the ancients were obsessed with equinoxes, when the day and the night are the same lengths. The length of the day and night on an equinox is 43,200 seconds. Now, skeptics will say this relationship between 43,200 and the size of the Earth is forced. They say, well, the planet is different sizes in different places, so this is just a coincidence.
No, is this one of those episodes where we make the skeptics look like idiots?
A little bit, yeah.
Oh, good. I love those.
Don't gloat.
Own the skeptics!
Most of the Great Pyramid is constructed of nummulite limestone, the reddish-brown blocks that we see today. This rock is found close to the site and is abundant. But the builders of the pyramid also used unusual materials not found locally. The exterior of the pyramid was once covered in casing stones made of bright white limestone. They were polished smooth and fit together so tightly that no seams were visible. These casing stones were cut and shipped from a quarry in Tura, almost 500 miles away. That's like carrying thousands of 10-ton stone blocks the length of the entire state of Florida. They must have been special. Unlike the limestone cut locally, Tura limestone lacks magnesium. This makes it an excellent insulator. Limestone can carry an electrical current. Tura limestone can't. Interior chambers were built with a rare type of granite called rose granite, also brought from hundreds of miles away. This granite has a high concentration of silicon dioxide, also known as quartz. When quartz is compressed or even just moved, it creates a charge called piezoelectricity. One face of the quartz will have a positive charge, the other will have a negative charge. Connect the two faces together and you have an electrical circuit. Because of this property, quartz is used in all kinds of modern devices like watches, clocks, TVs, GPS units, and on and on. To charge a watch that uses quartz, all you have to do is shake it. And if you've ever used a barbecue lighter, the voltage is created by a quartz crystal. The king and queen's chambers were built with granite that is 85% quartz. The tunnels and passageways are also lined with quartz-rich granite. If pressure was applied to all this granite, it would generate a tremendous amount of electricity, turning the pyramid into a giant power plant. And there's proof that this is exactly what happened. The idea that the Great Pyramid was a power plant is not new. It was first proposed in the 1970s. It was and is considered a fringe theory.
Ooh, those are my favorite kind of theories.
I know.
The fringier the better. Fringier? Fringier. No, that doesn't sound right. What's your problem?
Oh, I'm sorry. Is the show interrupting your train of thought?
Sarcasm, nice.
Well, what do you expect? I'm trying to set up the show here, and it's not easy to do when you're jumping in with comments. As more and more discoveries were made over the years, more evidence emerged that the Great Pyramid as a power plant wasn't fringe science, but actual science. One of the most compelling cases comes from Christopher Dunn. He believes the process starts in the subterranean chamber. Below the pyramid are aquifers. As water moves through the underground cavities, sound waves are created. The frequency of these waves resonate with the Earth's natural vibration. As those waves move up through the pyramid, a process is used to magnify, focus, and convert the sound into energy. The Queen's Chamber was used for a chemical reaction that created hydrogen, and there's substantial proof of this. There are two interior shafts that lead to the Queen's Chamber. The northern shaft has traces of hydrochloric acid. The southern has traces of hydrated zinc chloride. Combining these two chemicals creates a volatile reaction that generates hydrogen, a lot of hydrogen. This hydrogen gas would flow from the Queen's Chamber through the horizontal passage and into the Grand Gallery. The Grand Gallery is also made of granite. As the hydrogen gas builds up, the pressure compresses the granite, creating electricity. This electricity also ionizes the air, increasing conductivity. Within the Grand Gallery were 27 or 28 pairs of resonators that would vibrate and emit sound. The hydrogen atoms would organize themselves into waves in sympathy with the sound waves of the gallery. These sound waves further excite the stone, creating even more electricity.
Oh, so let me get this straight. You stick the shafts into the Queen's Chamber, which gets the stones excited?
That's right, but somehow when you say it, it sounds dirty.
I'm a naughty, naughty fish.
Acoustic engineers have determined the gallery resonates at 440 hertz and naturally emits an F-sharp chord. 440 hertz and the F-sharp chord have been connected to a lot of woo-woo ideas, but there's a reason for that. It's considered a sound that resonates in harmony with the Earth. The builders of the pyramid knew this. Longtime Mac users will recognize this sacred chord. At the top of the gallery is a small shaft leading to the King's Chamber. The opening is 8.4 by 4.8 inches. This is the perfect size for hydrogen microwaves to pass into the King's Chamber, which also resonates at 440 hertz and F-sharp. Above the King's Chamber are 5 layers of granite beams, stacked and separated by air gaps. This is called the relieving chamber because it was believed that this interior structure relieved the weight of the pyramid. That's not what it does. The beams are smooth on 3 sides, but rough cut on the top. Christopher Dunn believes the reason for the rough cut is this is how the beams were tuned. The builders could vibrate the granite beams and slowly chip away at the stone until they resonated with an F-sharp chord, which they do. The King's Chamber is what's known as a Helmholtz resonator. When you blow air across the top of a bottle and create sound, that's a Helmholtz resonator. Change the volume of liquid in the bottle, or change the volume of stone within the chamber, you change the pitch. The entire complex is a giant musical instrument. Now, some skeptics reluctantly agree that the Great Pyramid has musical properties, but for skeptics to consider the pyramid as a power plant, they would need evidence to show that a giant stone pyramid would respond to electromagnetic energy. There was no evidence of that until 2018. Whether true or not, it's scientifically possible that the Great Pyramid was a structure for creating, harnessing, and focusing energy. The exterior was made of material that insulates electricity. The interior was made of material that conducts electricity. The chambers were made of material that creates electricity. The next piece of evidence is the pyramid's ability to focus EM energy. In 2018, scientists used radio waves at different frequencies to see if the Great Pyramid would interact with electromagnetic waves of a resonant length. Their experiments proved that in a resonant state, the pyramid can concentrate electromagnetic energy in the internal chambers as well as under its base. Resonance in the pyramid can be induced by radio waves with the lengths ranging from 200 to 600 meters. The closer to 200 meters, the more dramatic the effect. A year after that, in 2019, Eric Wilson published a paper called A Large-Scale Thermal Acoustic Generator. The paper describes how, when granite and other rocks are vibrated, electrons will migrate through the rock and up to the surface. By combining science and music, the builders of the pyramid created a power-generating machine tuned to the natural harmonic of the Earth's vibration that primarily comes from the tidal energy created by the moon's gravity. This technology, created thousands of years ago, could generate unlimited clean energy. But how did they get the energy out? That brings us back to Tesla. His Wardenclyffe Tower was built on top of an aquifer, with copper and iron rods extending down into the water. When electricity was sent into the tower, it was to be transmitted around the world through the atmosphere. The pyramid is also built on an aquifer, and copper pipes and iron rods have recently been discovered there. If the capstone was made of gold, the energy concentrated inside the pyramid would have been drawn to the top and transmitted to the atmosphere. Tesla's wireless power distribution system used the resonance of the Earth, just like the pyramid. And just like the pyramid, the energy generated by Tesla's tower would be unlimited, clean, and virtually free for everyone on the planet. But Tesla's tower was destroyed by outside forces. There's evidence that the Great Pyramid was destroyed from within. In the year 1900, Nikola Tesla convinced J.P. Morgan to fund a project to create a wireless communication system. When Tesla received the funding, he decided to scale up the project. Rather than transmit messages around the world, he would transmit power. Tesla had already demonstrated that wireless power would work on a small scale. He famously had light bulbs scattered on the ground that would illuminate when a Tesla coil was activated nearby. Now he wanted to go bigger. He explained this world-changing technology to J.P. Morgan and asked him for more money to complete the project. Rather than support Tesla, Morgan pulled his funding, claiming breach of contract. J.P. Morgan owned General Electric, which would be made obsolete. He owned AT&T, which would also become obsolete. J.P. Morgan owned copper mines all over the world, and his factories generated miles of copper wire. J.P. Morgan owned rubber farms and factories that created insulation for wire. He owned steel companies and factories that built power generators. He owned timber mills that created telegraph and electricity poles. He owned coal mines that fueled existing power plants, and he owned 24 railroads that transported all these resources around the country. None of this would be necessary if Tesla created free, unlimited wireless power. For several years, Tesla wrote J.P. Morgan almost every month, begging him to reconsider. He wouldn't. Instead, J.P. Morgan chose to finance Tesla's competitors, Edison and Marconi, who were improving on and getting rich from Tesla's inventions. And not only did J.P. Morgan refuse any further investment, but he also put out word to everyone in the wealthy investor class that Tesla should be avoided. He was essentially blacklisted. By 1915, Tesla had accumulated so much debt that the bank foreclosed on the Wardenclyffe property. The tower was demolished in 1917 and sold for scrap. The project was never completed. Tesla was a genius, but he was at a disadvantage. Men like Edison and Marconi knew how to bring Tesla's inventions to market. They knew how to make technology accessible. And most of all, they knew how to play the game. You don't bite the hand that feeds you. That's why 84% of the world's energy is created from fossil fuels. It's also why Tesla died alone and broke. It's possible that the Great Pyramid suffered some catastrophic event that caused it to stop working. In addition to hydrochloric acid, there are traces of sulfuric acid in the southern shaft. In the northern shaft, there's zinc chloride and ammonium chloride. These chemicals can create hydrogen without being mixed, but if you do combine ammonium chloride with sulfuric acid, you get more than a reaction. You get an explosion. Because of the structure of the pyramid, this explosion could be controlled, but there's evidence that an uncontrolled explosion may have occurred. In 2001, in the Grand Gallery, scorch marks were discovered in the ceiling above where the resonators would have been. In the King's Chamber, cracks have been found in the granite beams. At first, this was thought to be caused by an earthquake, but the damage was only found in areas of the pyramid where the flow of highly compressed, heated hydrogen occurred. The walls in the King's Chamber have been pushed out over an inch. It takes a lot of pressure to push tons of granite out that far. The Great Step outside the King's Chamber also shows extensive damage like that from an explosion, not an earthquake. Other parts of the interior also show signs of charring. When the southern shaft was discovered, it was coated with salt about an inch thick. This would happen if hydrogen was boiling and bubbling up the shaft. What caused the pyramid power plant to explode is not known, but Christopher Dunn believes it was some sort of cataclysm, not an earthquake, but maybe an asteroid impact. There's a problem with this theory, though. The ancient Egyptians kept meticulous records of everything. There is no record of an impact during this time. Dunn believes it happened thousands of years earlier. And that brings me to this thought. Skeptics will say if the ancient Egyptians used electricity, there would be documentation, even hard evidence of it. You'll see true believers point to glyphs that look like light bulbs, but I honestly think that's a stretch. There's no evidence the Egyptians worked with glass or any components used to make a light bulb. So why is there no evidence of the use of electricity in ancient Egypt, and no record of electricity being generated by the Great Pyramid? Well, because the ancient Egyptians didn't build it. There really is no debate by mainstream academics about the who, when, why, or how of the Great Pyramid. It was built by ancient Egyptians in 4500 BC as a tomb for Khufu, and that's that. But what if none of that is true? What if the ancient Egyptians didn't build the pyramid, but found it? And when they found it, it had been dormant for years, maybe thousands of years. Graham Hancock is a proponent of the Orion constellation theory. This says the Great Pyramid complex is almost a perfect match for the stars in the Orion constellation. But they don't line up to where Orion is today. They line up with where Orion was in the sky 13,500 years ago. We've discussed how the builders were obsessed with equinoxes. The Sphinx faces due east, and on the vernal equinox, the constellation that rose due east 13,500 years ago was Leo. Now, I'll concede the astronomical evidence could be a coincidence, but there is hard evidence that these structures are older than originally thought. You can't carbon date limestone, but there are clues that the pyramid and the Sphinx have been there for a long, long time. Robert Schoch from Boston University believes the Sphinx and Giza complex is about 13,500 years old. Giza has been an extremely dry climate since the time of the pharaohs, but the Sphinx shows signs not only of wind and sand erosion, but also extreme water erosion. The erosion patterns around the base of the Sphinx could only occur if huge volumes of water are washing over the plateau at violent speeds. There's evidence this happened at the end of the Younger Dryas, which marked the end of the last ice age in 9700 BC. Glaciers were thought to have melted rapidly. Within a few centuries, sea levels rose 500 feet. This is fast in geologic time. But as more evidence was gathered, melting appeared to happen in a matter of decades. This would cause dramatic changes in the Earth's climate. But when recent ice core samples were studied, things got even more dramatic. There's evidence that the last ice age didn't end over centuries or decades, but ended in one single day. Some claim that an asteroid impact caused the last ice age to end. A worldwide disaster like the Chicxulub impact that wiped out the dinosaurs. That's not what happened. An impact causes cooling. Recent studies show that there was a major solar event that happened around 9700 BC, basically the mother of all CMEs. A violent plasma storm hit the Earth and overwhelmed the Earth's magnetosphere, which is our defense against solar radiation. Without the protection of the magnetosphere, massive lightning strikes happened all over the Earth. Lightning that was orders of magnitude more intense than anything we've ever seen. This lightning was hundreds or even thousands of times more powerful than anything from a thunderstorm. There's evidence in over 120 countries of rock melted and turned to glass during this event. This is called vitrification. There's evidence of vitrification in moon rocks. We know for a fact large mammals like saber-toothed tigers and woolly mammoths were wiped out at this time. They didn't slowly go extinct, they instantly went extinct. During the 4 or 5 days of this event, the Earth was also awash in lethal radiation. Only animals that can go underground survived. Most of the human race died during this event. Only humans living near caves were able to find shelter and survive. If glaciers, which covered 30% of the Earth's surface, melted in a day or two, think of the speed, volume, and pressure of water that would rush across the Earth's surface. This water would act like a power washer on stone constructions like the Sphinx and pyramids. Meanwhile, a sky full of plasma and lightning and radiation would have severely damaged the Great Pyramid if it was using a volatile chemical reaction to create power. Every culture has a flood myth that served as a reset of civilization. All those stories seem to point to a cataclysm at the end of the Younger Dryas. Myths of lost continents like Atlantis also fit into this timeline. Now, I'm not claiming anything I've said today is what happened, but I am saying there's evidence that it was possible that an advanced civilization existed thousands of years ago. That civilization had the technology to create unlimited clean energy. Then the glaciers melted, a great flood came, solar plasma and radiation destroyed a significant amount of life on the planet. The civilization then disappeared. Then thousands of years later, as the great Egyptian culture was forming, they would have utilized the pyramid, not for power but for ceremonial or religious purposes. They would have altered the Sphinx, carving away the original design and replacing it with a design of their own. And we know this is what they did. Mainstream scientists are still not convinced, and that's okay. As time goes on and more secrets are revealed, sooner or later we will learn the truth. And I suspect we'll learn that the pyramid power plant theory was right all along. Whoever built the pyramids created energy that wasn't harmful to the Earth, but resonated in harmony with it. A suspicious person might wonder why, if this theory has been around for 50 years, nobody's tried to replicate it, even on a small scale. Unlimited clean energy for everyone on Earth sounds like a way for the entire human race to take a huge step forward. Think of the technological advances that could be made if electricity was free. Think of the political strife, economic instability, and the endless wars that could be avoided. But maybe what's happening now is what happened to Tesla 100 years ago. In Tesla's time, nobody was interested in creating technology that would make power free for everyone. Empires owned by JP Morgan, the Vanderbilts, and the Rockefellers would have been devastated. The Carnegies, the DuPonts, and the Mellons all would have seen significant losses. These families owned all the energy production and distribution in the United States. Their companies were the lifeblood of American industry. The families were American royalty. If Tesla was able to achieve his vision, not only would the wealth of these families be diminished, so would America's standing in the world as a great new industrial power. Tesla said he wanted to bring abundant electrical energy to remote, underdeveloped parts of the world, to foster closer communication between nations. This couldn't be allowed to happen. America and the corporations that controlled it would never have given up their advantage. They still won't. When Tesla died, the FBI and agents of the OSS were, for some reason, close by. Tesla's documents were stored in 80 boxes, all organized and numbered by Tesla himself. Only 60 boxes were discovered. And since then, a few scientists have stated that Tesla's invention would have never worked. But that's what scientists said of most of his inventions. Viewers of this channel know that most science is bought and paid for by corporations and governments. This is especially true in the last couple of years.
Get the jab!
Right.
Another jab! Another jab! Another!
Yep.
Whether those jabs work or not, you human pincushions are making people rich.
Oh, there's no doubt about that. 80% of the products we use today can be traced back to Tesla. But the technology that we really need, now more than ever, is inexpensive, clean energy. Sadly, that technology died with Tesla. Instead, the world went in the direction of coal and oil, and nations fought and continue to fight wars to control these limited resources. Oil, coal, and war may be terrible for the planet and the people who live on it, but they're great for business, and for all his genius, that's something Nikola Tesla never understood. Thanks so much for hanging out today. My name is AJ. There's Hecklefish.
Now, mother haze.
This has been a Y-Files compilation. If you had fun, you learned anything, do him a favor, subscribe, comment, like, share. It's a small thing to push the buttons, but it means a lot to us. And like every topic we cover on the channel, all these episodes were recommended by you. So if there's a story you want to see, go to theyfiles.com/tips. And remember, the Y-Files is also a podcast. Twice a week, I post deep dives into the topics we cover here on the channel, and I also post episodes that wouldn't be allowed on the channel. The name of the podcast is called The Y-Files, Operation Podcast. We're on the charts. Check it out. And if you want to make some new friends, check out the Y-Files Discord server. We're over 70,000 strong on there. So 24/7, there's someone on Discord talking about the same weird stuff we talk about here on the channel. It's a great group. It's really supportive. It's an amazing community. It's a lot of fun, and it's free to join. Now, if you want to know what's going on with the Y-Files at any given time, you can go to our production calendar, which we do our best to keep up to date. Anyway, it's at theyfiles.com/Cal. There we post our episode schedule, podcasts, live streams, all that stuff. I need to say a special thank you to our Patreon members who make all this possible. Every episode of the Y-Files is dedicated to you. I could not do this without you. And if you'd like to join this amazing community and support the channel, consider becoming a member on Patreon. For as little as $3 a month, you get access to videos early with no commercials, access to merch only available to members, plus you get at least 2 private live streams every week just for you. And they're fun because you get to meet me and the whole team. We turn our cameras on. You can turn your camera on, jump up on stage, ask a question, suggest a topic, make fun of Victoria's feet, whatever you want to do. Call my wife hot. Just be careful with that. I think it's the best perk there is for a couple of bucks. Another great way to support the channel is grab something from the Y-Files store.
Grab a heck of this t-shirt or one of these fistable coffee mugs you can stick your fist in, or whatever you want to stick in there. It's none of my concern. Just pretend it smells whole. Stick a baby fetus in there. A seal fetus, not a human fetus. That'd be gross. Oh, get some of my face on it. Oh, get one of these haunted voodoo dolls, the U2s. Oh, what mega squeezy animal. Target, hecklish, toy doll. We may want to cut the fetus joke out.
But before you buy anything from the Y-Files store, consider becoming a member on YouTube. For $2.99 a month, you get 10% off everything in the Y-Files store, everything forever. So if you're going to spend $40 over there, become a member here, save 10%, and it pays for itself. I think it's a great perk. Those are the plugs, and that's going to do it. Until next time, be safe, be kind, know that you are appreciated.
In Area 51, a secret code inside the Bible said I would. I love my UFOs and paranormal fun, as well as music, so I'm singing it like I should. But then another conspiracy theory becomes the truth, my friends, and it never ends. No, it never ends. I feel the crap cat and got stuck inside Mel's hole with MK Ultra. I'm being only too aware. Did Stanley Kubrick fake the moon landing alone on a film set, or were the shadow people there? The Roswell aliens just fought the smiling man, I'm told, and his name was Cold. And I can't believe I'm dancing with the Hecklefish on Thursday nights with AJ2 and the Wi-Fi's happening all through the night. All I ever wanted was to just hear the truth, so the Wi-Fi's on repeat all through the night. The Mothman sightings and the solar storm still come. to Agatha, the secret city underground. Mysterious number stations, planet Serpo 2, Project Stargate, and what the Dark Watchers found. We're in a simulation, don't you worry though. The Black Knight satellite, it's over.